thousands of years, Zen masters have passed down ancient secrets about finding peace amidst life's constant changes. These aren't complex philosophies or difficult ideas. They're simple truths that speak directly to the heart. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. As we journey together through these teachings, allow your breathing to become naturally slower and deeper. There's nothing you need to achieve or understand perfectly. Simply let these ancient stories wash over you. Each teaching we'll explore tonight offers a pathway to the kind of inner peace that makes sleep not just possible, but profoundly restorative. The wisdom of Zen Buddhism reminds us that peace isn't something we must search for in distant places. It's always here, waiting to be recognized in this very moment, this very breath. Relax. Take a slow, deep breath, and let's begin our journey together. Master Joshu was famous for living each day as if it were completely new. Students would often try to remind him of conversations from the day before or commitments he had made, but Joshu would look at them with genuine puzzlement, as if they were speaking of events from another lifetime. One evening, a traveling merchant arrived at Joshu's temple seeking shelter for the night. The merchant had heard of the master's reputation and hoped to receive some wisdom along with lodging. During their conversation over a simple meal, the merchant shared his troubles. "Master Joshu," the merchant said, "I cannot sleep peacefully anymore. 3 months ago, I made a terrible business decision that cost me nearly everything. I lost my shop, disappointed my family, and feel like I've failed everyone who trusted me. Each night, when I lie down, I replay that moment over and over, thinking of what I should have done differently." Joshu listened carefully, nodding with compassion. When the merchant finished, the master was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Where is this terrible decision now?" The merchant looked confused. "What do you mean, master?" "This decision that troubles you so much," Joshu said. "Where is it right now? Can you show it to me?" The merchant gestured vaguely. "It's in my memory, in my mind. It happened 3 months ago." "Ah," said Joshu, "but 3 months ago is not here." "If it's not here, how can it hurt you now?" "But the consequences," the merchant protested. "The results of that decision are still affecting my life today." Joshu nodded. "Yes, today you have less money than before. Today, your circumstances are different. But the decision itself, that moment of choosing, where is it?" The merchant sat in silence, beginning to understand. "Every morning," Joshu continued, "the sun rises new. Every breath you take has never been breathed before. Yet you insist on breathing yesterday's air, living in yesterday's moment. How exhausting that must be." The merchant's eyes filled with tears. "But how do I stop remembering? How do I stop feeling the pain of my mistake?" "You don't stop the memory from coming," Joshu replied gently. "You stop giving it a place to stay. When yesterday knocks on today's door, you can acknowledge it politely and let it move on. You don't have to invite it in for tea." That night, the merchant slept more peacefully than he had in months. When he woke, he found that Master Joshu was already working in the garden, completely absorbed in the task of weeding, as if their conversation had never happened. "Master," the merchant said, approaching, "thank you for your wisdom last night about letting go of yesterday." Joshu looked up from his weeding with genuine surprise. "Yesterday? I'm sorry, but I don't remember yesterday. I've been too busy with today." He smiled and returned to his work, pulling weeds with the same careful attention he brought to every present moment. The merchant realized he had received his final teaching. He left the temple that morning with a lighter step and a quieter mind, understanding that each moment offers a choice to carry the past or to travel light. Years later, people would ask the merchant how he had recovered so completely from his business failure. He would smile and say, "I learned from a wise man that yesterday is a place I no longer live." This story reveals one of Zen Buddhism's most practical teachings for peaceful sleep. Our minds have a tendency to replay the day's events, especially the difficult ones, long after they've ended. We carry conversations, mistakes, and worries from hours or even years ago as if they were happening right now. Master Joshu understood something essential. The past exists only in memory, and memory exists only in the present moment. When we lie awake, rehashing old conversations or regrets, we're not actually dealing with past events. We're creating present suffering by giving energy to thoughts about things that no longer exist. This doesn't mean we ignore the lessons from our experiences or pretend difficult things didn't happen. The merchant still had to deal with his changed financial circumstances, but he learned to distinguish between addressing present realities and torturing himself with mental replays of past moments. The practice of releasing yesterday is especially important as we prepare for sleep. Our minds often become most active when we finally lie down, bringing up every unfinished conversation and unresolved situation from the day. Zen teaches us that this mental review is optional. We can acknowledge these thoughts without giving them a permanent residence in our consciousness. When memories of the day arise as you settle into rest tonight, you might try Master Joshu's approach. Notice the thought, acknowledge it politely, and let it move on. Don't try to push it away forcefully, but don't invite it to stay either. Like clouds passing through an empty sky, let these mental visitors drift through your awareness without setting up camp. The beautiful truth is that each moment of sleep offers a return to freshness. When we release our grip on yesterday's burdens, we make space for today's peace to emerge naturally. A young woman named Myoan had dedicated her life to Buddhist practice. She spent years studying sacred texts, learning meditation techniques, and building what she considered an impressive spiritual resume. She could recite hundreds of sutras from memory, sit in meditation for hours without moving, and explain complex philosophical concepts to other students. Myoan felt proud of her accomplishments and looked forward to the day when a master would recognize her achievements and perhaps invite her to become a teacher herself. She carried her knowledge like precious jewels, carefully polished and frequently displayed. One winter, Myoan decided to visit Master Bankei, a teacher known for his direct approach and ability to cut through spiritual pretensions. She packed her most treasured possession, a collection of handwritten notes containing insights from years of study. These notes represented everything she had learned and understood about Buddhism. The journey to Bankei's temple required crossing a frozen river. Local guides warned that the ice had been thinning due to an unexpected warm spell, but Myoan was eager to reach the master and confident in her ability to cross safely. Halfway across the river, the ice gave way. Myoan plunged into the freezing water and, despite her desperate efforts, watched helplessly as her precious bundle of notes was swept away by the current. Local fishermen rescued her from the water, but her years of accumulated spiritual knowledge disappeared downstream, dissolved into unreadable pulp. Myoan sat on the riverbank, shivering and devastated. Everything she had worked for, every insight she had carefully recorded, every achievement she had accumulated, was gone. She felt as if her entire spiritual identity had been erased in an instant. When she finally reached Bankei's temple, still damp and shaken, she could barely speak through her tears. "Master," she said, "I have lost everything. All my years of study, all my understanding, gone. I have nothing left to offer." Bankei looked at her with eyes full of warmth and understanding. "Wonderful," he said simply. Myoan stared at him in shock. "Wonderful? How can you say that? I've lost years of work." "What have you actually lost?" Bankei asked gently. "Can you no longer breathe? Has your capacity for kindness disappeared? Is your awareness gone?" "No, but my knowledge, my understanding." "Ah," Bankei smiled, "your collection. You've lost your collection. But tell me, what were you before you started collecting all that knowledge?" Myoan opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She had been so focused on accumulating spiritual achievements that she had forgotten what lay beneath them all. "Before you learned your first sutra," Bankei continued, "what was already here? Before you understood your first teaching, what was listening? In that moment, sitting with nothing left to prove or protect, Myoan experienced something she had never encountered in all her years of study. A profound stillness opened within her, a peace that needed no knowledge to sustain it, no achievements to validate it. "The river has been very kind to you," Bankei said softly. "It took away everything that was hiding your true nature." Myoan stayed at Bankei's temple for several months, but not to accumulate new knowledge. Instead, she learned to rest in the awareness that had been present all along, beneath all her spiritual collecting. When she eventually returned home, people noticed something different about her. She moved with a simplicity and presence that all her previous learning had never given her. When students asked her for teachings, she would often say, "The most important thing I learned was what I already knew before I learned anything." This story speaks to a different kind of burden we often carry into sleep, the weight of trying to be someone special or accomplished. Many of us have spent years building an identity around our knowledge, our skills, our spiritual or personal achievements. We go to bed worrying about maintaining these identities, proving our worth, or living up to the image we've created of ourselves. Myoan's experience reveals something liberating. Our deepest peace doesn't depend on any of our accumulated identities or achievements. Beneath all our roles, accomplishments, and self-images lies something much simpler and more restful, the basic awareness that witnesses all experience without needing to prove anything. In Zen Buddhism, this is sometimes called original nature or Buddha nature. It's not something we achieve through effort or lose through failure. It's the fundamental peace that was here before we started trying to become someone special, and it remains here when all our attempts at self-improvement fall away. As you prepare for sleep tonight, consider what collections you might be carrying. Not just physical possessions, but mental accumulations, your achievements, your self-image, your spiritual or personal progress. These things may have value in daily life, but they can become burdens when we feel we must constantly maintain and protect them. Sleep offers a beautiful opportunity to temporarily set down these collections and return to what you were before you started gathering them. Just as Myoan discovered peace when she stopped trying to be an accomplished spiritual student, you might find rest when you stop trying to be anyone in particular for these hours of sleep. The river that took away Myoan's notes revealed what had been hidden underneath, a natural peace that needs no maintenance, no protection, no improvement. This same peace is available to you now, not as a reward for spiritual accomplishment, but as your birthright, always present beneath whatever identity you've constructed. In the gentle darkness of sleep, you can let all your collections drift away and return to this original simplicity. Tomorrow you can pick up your roles and responsibilities again if you choose, but for now, rest in the knowledge that your deepest peace requires nothing more than your willingness to stop trying and simply be. Master Sengai lived in a small temple at the base of a mountain known for its sudden violent storms. The temple had been built there centuries earlier because of a natural spring that provided pure water, but the location also meant enduring harsh weather that could last for days. One autumn, a particularly fierce storm struck the region. For 3 days and nights, powerful winds howled around the temple, rain pounded the roof, and lightning split the sky. The storm was so intense that several trees fell, blocking the path to the village and trapping Sengai and his young attendant, Dogen, inside the temple. Dogen had only recently come to study with Sengai and was still learning the ways of Zen practice. As the storm raged on, he became increasingly agitated. He paced the temple halls, frequently checking the windows and expressing frustration about their situation. "Master," Dogen said on the second day, raising his voice to be heard over the wind, "this storm is terrible. I was supposed to visit my family in the village today. We're running low on rice. The roof is starting to leak in the corner. When will this end?" Sengai, who had been sitting quietly in meditation despite the chaos outside, opened his eyes and smiled. "Dogen," he said peacefully, "come sit with me and listen to the storm." "Listen to it?" Dogen replied with exasperation. "How can I ignore such terrible noise? It's keeping me from everything I need to do." "I didn't say ignore it," Sengai corrected gently. "I said, listen to it." Reluctantly, Dogen sat beside his master. At first, all he could hear was the overwhelming sound of wind and rain, which only increased his anxiety. But Sengai guided him to listen more carefully. "What do you hear in the wind?" Sengai asked. "Destruction," Dogen answered immediately. "Chaos. Problems." "Listen deeper," the master encouraged. "The wind itself, what is it saying?" Gradually, as Dogen stopped fighting the sound and began to truly listen, something shifted. The howling wind, which had seemed like an enemy, began to sound different. There was a rhythm to it, a natural power that was neither good nor bad, but simply itself. "The wind doesn't hate us," Dogen said slowly, a new understanding dawning. "It's not trying to hurt us. It's just being wind." "Exactly," Sengai nodded. "And the rain?" Dogen listened again. "The rain is just being rain. It's not personal." As the storm continued into its third day, something remarkable happened to Dogen's experience. Instead of fighting the weather mentally, he began to appreciate its raw power. He noticed how the sound of rain on the roof created a natural rhythm for meditation. He observed how the dramatic sky, when glimpsed through the windows, had its own terrible beauty. When the storm finally passed and the sun broke through the clouds, Dogen was surprised to realize he felt almost disappointed. The 3 days he had initially seen as imprisonment had become a profound teaching. "Master," he said as they cleared fallen branches from the temple path, "I understand now. The storm was never the problem. My fighting against the storm was the problem." Sengai smiled as he picked up a broken branch. "Yes, and now you know something about your mind that will serve you well. When life brings storms, you can either exhaust yourself fighting the wind, or you can learn to dance with it. From that day forward, Dogen approached difficulties differently. When challenging situations arose, he would remember the storm and ask himself, "Am I fighting the wind, or am I learning its rhythm?" Years later, when Dogen became a teacher himself, students would often ask him about handling life's difficulties. He would tell them about the 3-day storm and say, "Peace doesn't come from an absence of storms. It comes from finding your center within them." This story illustrates one of Zen Buddhism's most practical teachings for achieving inner peace, the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in life. Storms come, plans get disrupted, circumstances change in ways we don't prefer. But suffering, the mental anguish we add to pain, is optional. Dogen initially created suffering by fighting mentally against the storm. He couldn't change the weather, but he could exhaust himself resisting it. When Sengai taught him to listen instead of fight, Dogen discovered that accepting the storm didn't mean liking it or becoming passive. It meant stopping the additional layer of mental resistance that was causing him more distress than the storm itself. This teaching is especially relevant for peaceful sleep. Many of us lie awake at night mentally fighting against things we cannot change: difficult relationships, work situations, health concerns, or past decisions. This mental resistance creates a storm in our minds that can be more disturbing than the original circumstances. Zen practice suggests a different approach. Instead of trying to solve every problem before sleep, we can learn to rest peacefully even when external conditions aren't perfect. This doesn't mean ignoring real issues or becoming passive about things we can influence. It means recognizing what we can and cannot control and placing our energy accordingly. When worries arise as you prepare for sleep tonight, you might try Sengai's approach. Instead of fighting the thoughts, listen to them without resistance. Notice that thoughts, like storms, are natural phenomena that arise and pass away on their own. They only become problems when we struggle against them. The peace that Zen Buddhism offers isn't dependent on perfect circumstances. It's available right now, in the middle of whatever storms may be present in your life. Like learning to hear the rhythm in the wind, you can find rest even when external conditions aren't calm. Ijo was the most frustrated student at Master Dogen's monastery. While other monks seemed to slip naturally into deep meditation, Ijo's mind remained restlessly active no matter how hard he tried to concentrate. During sitting meditation, his thoughts raced. During walking meditation, he couldn't maintain focus. Even during simple tasks like sweeping, his mind wandered constantly. For months, Ijo tried every technique he had heard about. He attempted to force his mind into stillness through willpower. He tried counting his breaths, but would lose track after a few moments. He attempted to empty his mind of all thoughts, but this only seemed to create more mental activity. The harder he tried to achieve the peaceful states he observed in other students, the more agitated he became. Other monks would sit in meditation with serene expressions, their posture steady and minds apparently calm. Ijo would watch them enviously, wondering what was wrong with him that he couldn't achieve the same peace. He began to feel like a failure as a student, convinced he lacked the natural ability for Zen practice. One evening after a particularly difficult meditation session, Ijo approached Master Dogen with his frustration. "Master," he said, "I've been practicing for over a year, but my meditation is terrible. My mind won't stay still." Other students seem to find peace so easily, but I can't concentrate for even a few breaths. Perhaps I'm not suited for this path." Master Dogen listened carefully to Ijo's complaint. When the student finished, the master asked a simple question. "When your mind is active and distracted, who is noticing this?" Ijo paused, confused by the question. "I am, Master. I notice that my mind is wandering." "Ah," Dogen said with interest. "So even when your mind is restless, something in you is aware of this restlessness?" "Yes," Ijo replied, still not understanding the significance. "And this awareness that notices your distracted mind," Dogen continued, "is it itself distracted, or is it calm and clear?" Ijo had never considered this before. He reflected for a moment. The awareness itself seems steady. It's like a clear sky that can see both calm weather and storms. Dogen smiled. "You have been meditating perfectly all along. You've just been looking in the wrong direction." "I don't understand, Master." "You've been trying to control your thoughts and create peaceful states," Dogen explained. "But meditation is not about controlling thoughts. It's about recognizing the awareness that observes all thoughts, whether peaceful or agitated. This awareness doesn't need to be improved or perfected. It's already complete." "But what about my restless mind?" Ijo asked. "What about it?" Dogen replied. "Restless minds need meditation just as much as calm minds. Actually, they often make better meditation students because they don't have the illusion that they're already peaceful." From that conversation forward, Ijo's practice transformed completely. Instead of fighting his active mind, he began to rest in the awareness that could observe both restlessness and calm with equal clarity. He stopped trying to create perfect meditation states and started appreciating the awareness that was present regardless of what thoughts appeared. Paradoxically, as soon as Ijo stopped trying so hard to be peaceful, a natural peace began to emerge. His mind still sometimes wandered during meditation, but this no longer disturbed him. He understood that the wandering was just weather in the sky of awareness, and the sky itself remained untouched. 6 months later, new students would come to Ijo for guidance, drawn by his natural calm and lack of spiritual pretension. He would tell them, "The most important thing I learned was to stop trying to be a good meditator and start noticing what was already meditation itself." When students complained about their restless minds, Ijo would smile and say, "Wonderful. You're in perfect position to discover what doesn't need your mind to be different in order to be at peace." This story addresses a common source of bedtime anxiety, the pressure to be different than we are. Just as Ijo exhausted himself trying to force his mind into an ideal state, many of us lie awake trying to make our thoughts, feelings, or circumstances conform to some image of how they should be. Ijo's breakthrough came when he stopped fighting his restless mind and began to recognize the awareness that could observe restlessness without being disturbed by it. This awareness, what Zen calls our original nature, doesn't depend on any particular mental or emotional state to be at peace. This teaching is particularly helpful for those who struggle with an active mind at bedtime. Instead of fighting against thoughts or trying to force your mind to be quiet, you can learn to rest in the awareness that notices all mental activity. This awareness is naturally peaceful and doesn't require your thoughts to be any particular way. When you notice your mind being active as you prepare for sleep, instead of judging this as a problem, you might try Ijo's discovery. Who or what is noticing the mental activity? This noticing awareness itself is already still, even when what it notices is movement. Zen Buddhism teaches that we don't need to fix ourselves to find peace. We need to recognize the peace that's already present, observing all our human experiences with gentle acceptance. Like Ijo, you might discover that the very awareness that seems to have problems is actually the solution itself. The restless mind isn't an obstacle to peace, it's another opportunity to recognize the awareness that remains calm regardless of what thoughts appear. This awareness doesn't need meditation to be peaceful, doesn't need problems to be solved, and doesn't need you to be different than you are right now. As you settle into sleep tonight, you can rest in this awareness that accepts all experiences equally. Whether your mind is busy or quiet, whether your day was smooth or challenging, this fundamental awareness remains steady and can serve as a natural foundation for deep, restorative rest. Yamamoto was one of the richest merchants in all of Japan. His trading company owned ships that sailed to distant countries, warehouses filled with silk and spices, and shops in every major city. He lived in a magnificent estate with gardens designed by famous artists and owned treasures that emperors envied. Despite all his wealth, Yamamoto found himself strangely unsatisfied. Each new acquisition brought only temporary pleasure before the desire for something else arose. He had everything he thought he wanted, yet felt empty inside. Sleep became difficult, as his mind raced with plans for new ventures and worries about protecting what he'd already gained. Hearing of a famous Zen master named Ikkyu who lived simply in the mountains, Yamamoto decided to visit him. Perhaps this wise teacher could explain why all his success felt hollow. The journey to Ikkyu's hermitage required leaving his comfortable carriage and traveling on foot up narrow mountain paths. When Yamamoto finally arrived, he was shocked by what he found. The master lived in a tiny hut with walls so thin you could see daylight through the gaps. His possessions consisted of a single robe, one bowl, and a sleeping mat. Ikkyu welcomed Yamamoto warmly and invited him to share a simple meal of rice and pickled vegetables. The merchant, accustomed to elaborate banquets, felt awkward eating such plain food. He couldn't understand how anyone could be content with so little. "Master Ikkyu," Yamamoto said after they finished eating, "I've come seeking wisdom. I have more wealth than most people see in a lifetime, yet I feel constantly restless and unsatisfied. You have almost nothing, yet you seem genuinely happy. How is this possible?" Ikkyu smiled and gestured toward his small window, where afternoon sunlight streamed in. "Tell me," he said, "do you own any sunlight?" "Of course not," Yamamoto replied, puzzled by the question. "No one can own sunlight. Yet you're enjoying it right now," Ikkyu observed. "Is it any less beautiful because you don't possess it?" The merchant had to admit that the sunlight was indeed beautiful, and that not owning it didn't diminish his experience of its warmth and brightness. "What about that bird singing outside?" Ikkyu continued. "Do you own its song?" "No," Yamamoto said, listening to the clear notes floating through the window. "Does that make the song less lovely?" Yamamoto began to understand where this was leading, but Ikkyu wasn't finished. "The mountain air you're breathing, the peace you feel in this moment, the taste of our simple meal, do you own any of these things?" "No, master." "Yet you're experiencing all of them fully," Ikkyu said gently. "You see, my friend, you've been trying to own experiences instead of simply having them. You collect possessions thinking they will give you the feelings you seek. but the feelings were always available without the possessions. Yamamoto sat quietly, absorbing this perspective. After a moment, he asked, "But surely having nice things can add to life's enjoyment?" "Certainly," Ikkyu agreed. "I don't suggest that comfort is wrong or that beauty has no value. But notice the difference between appreciating something and needing to possess it. When you require ownership for enjoyment, you limit yourself to only the tiny fraction of beauty that you can afford to buy." That evening, as they sat watching the sunset, Yamamoto experienced something he hadn't felt in years. Despite being far from his luxurious home, surrounded by none of his expensive possessions, he felt a deep contentment. The colors in the sky, the sounds of the forest, and the simple pleasure of quiet conversation created a richness that all his wealth had never provided. "I think I understand now," Yamamoto said. "I've been so busy trying to capture happiness that I forgot to simply be happy." Ikkyu nodded. "Happiness isn't something you can store in warehouses or display in your home. It's like this sunset. You can't own it, but you can receive it completely." When Yamamoto returned to his business life, he found that his relationship with wealth had transformed. He still conducted his affairs skillfully, but he no longer felt desperate to acquire more. He began to notice pleasures that cost nothing: morning bird songs, the taste of simple tea, conversations with friends. His sleep improved dramatically because his mind had stopped its restless reaching for the next thing. Years later, people would ask Yamamoto about the secret to his newfound peace. He would smile and say, "I learned that I was already rich beyond measure. I just had to stop trying to buy what I already owned." This story reveals a truth that modern life often obscures. Most of the experiences that bring genuine contentment are freely available to everyone. Yamamoto had been seeking through accumulation what was already present through simple awareness. In Zen Buddhism, this teaching is sometimes called just enough mind. It's the recognition that we already have access to most of what we need for happiness. The warmth of sunlight, the beauty of changing seasons, the satisfaction of breathing freely, the peace of a quiet moment. These experiences don't require ownership or achievement. This perspective is especially helpful for peaceful sleep. Much of our bedtime mental activity consists of wanting different circumstances, wanting to solve problems, wanting security or success or love. This endless reaching keeps the mind active and prevents natural rest. When we learn to appreciate what's already present, the mind can finally relax. Instead of lying awake planning how to get more of what we want, we can rest in gratitude for what we already have. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on goals, but rather finding contentment that doesn't depend on circumstances being different. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might try Ikkyu's exercise. Notice what you're experiencing right now that you couldn't buy if you tried. The comfort of your bed, the air you're breathing, the simple miracle of consciousness itself. These gifts are yours not because you earned them or purchased them, but simply because you're alive and aware. The restless mind that seeks more and more finally finds peace when it recognizes the abundance that's always been here. Like Yamamoto discovering that he was already rich, you might find that the contentment you've been seeking is available right now, in this simple moment of rest. At Shunryu Suzuki's temple lived an ordinary orange cat named Tama. Unlike the human students who came to study Zen, Tama had no interest in spiritual teachings, meditation techniques, or enlightenment. She spent her days doing what cats do, sleeping in sunny spots, hunting mice, and grooming herself with complete attention. The human students at the temple worked very hard at their practice. They sat in meditation for hours, studied complex texts, and worried constantly about their spiritual progress. They compared themselves to other students and to famous masters from the past. Many struggled with doubt about whether they were practicing correctly or making sufficient advancement on the path. One student named Kenji was particularly troubled by his apparent lack of progress. He had been practicing for 3 years, but felt no closer to enlightenment than when he started. His mind still wandered during meditation. He still got angry when things didn't go his way, and he still felt confused about the deeper teachings. One afternoon, Kenji sat in the garden feeling frustrated about his practice. Tama appeared and settled down in a patch of sunlight nearby. The cat stretched luxuriously, then curled into a perfect circle and began to purr with what seemed like complete satisfaction. "Look at that cat," Kenji thought bitterly. "She has no spiritual practice at all, yet she seems more peaceful than any of us students." Master Suzuki happened to walk by at that moment and noticed Kenji's troubled expression. "What's bothering you?" the master asked. "Master," Kenji said, "I've been practicing for years, but I still feel far from enlightenment." Yet that cat just lies there doing nothing, and she seems perfectly content. It doesn't seem fair. Suzuki looked at Tama, who was now washing her paw with complete focus. "What makes you think Tama isn't enlightened?" he asked. Kenji was startled by the question. "She's just an animal. She doesn't meditate or study or practice." "Watch her more carefully," Suzuki suggested. "When Tama is washing, is she thinking about yesterday's meal or planning tomorrow's nap?" Kenji observed the cat more closely. Tama was utterly absorbed in cleaning her paw, giving it her complete attention without any apparent mental commentary. "No," Kenji admitted. "She seems completely present. When she sleeps, does she worry about whether she's sleeping correctly?" "No, she just sleeps." "When she's hungry, does she feel guilty about wanting food, or does she simply seek food? She just seeks food without drama." Suzuki nodded. "And when she's content, does she question whether her contentment is spiritual enough, or does she simply rest in contentment?" "She simply rests in it," Kenji said, beginning to understand. "Tama lives each moment completely," Suzuki explained. "She doesn't add extra layers of thinking about her experience. When she's hungry, she's just hungry. When she's content, she's just content. She doesn't compare her current state to some ideal state she thinks she should achieve." Kenji watched as Tama finished grooming and settled back into her sunny spot, her purring audible from several feet away. There was something profound in the cat's simple presence, a quality of being completely at ease with herself and her circumstances. "But Master," Kenji protested, "surely there's more to enlightenment than just being like a cat." Suzuki smiled. "The Buddha nature that we seek is not something we need to create or achieve. It's our original condition before we complicate it with seeking and striving. Tama hasn't lost touch with this natural state because she never learned to think it was missing." From that day forward, Kenji began to study Tama as much as he studied Buddhist texts. He noticed how she ate when hungry without guilt, slept when tired without resistance, and played when energetic without self-consciousness. Most remarkably, she seemed to live without the constant mental commentary that made human life so complicated. Gradually, Kenji learned to approach his own practice with more of Tama's simplicity. Instead of constantly evaluating his meditation, he began to simply meditate. Instead of worrying about spiritual progress, he focused on being present to whatever was happening right now. 6 months later, Master Suzuki announced that Kenji had made remarkable progress in his understanding. When other students asked Kenji what had changed in his practice, he would smile and say, "I learned to be more like the temple cat. I stopped trying to become enlightened and started being what I already am." Years later, when Kenji became a teacher himself, he would often point out to students that the temple cats were the most accomplished practitioners in the monastery. "They live in perfect Buddha nature," he would say, "not because they achieved it, but because they never believed they had lost it." This delightful story points to one of Zen Buddhism's most counterintuitive teachings. What we seek is not something we need to achieve, but something we need to stop obscuring. Tama the cat lived in natural peace, not because she was spiritually advanced, but because she was simple. Human beings have a unique gift of self-awareness, but this gift can become a burden when we use it to constantly evaluate and judge our experience. We think about thinking, worry about worrying, and try to improve our improving. This mental complexity, while sometimes useful, can separate us from the simple presence that brings genuine peace. Tama's example shows us what Zen calls ordinary mind. She wasn't trying to be spiritual or achieve special states. She was simply present to whatever was happening without adding layers of commentary or judgment. When hungry, she was just hungry. When content, she was just content. This teaching is particularly relevant for sleep. Many of us lie awake thinking about our thinking, worrying about our worrying, or trying to force ourselves into the right state for sleep. We create a complex mental project out of something that should be simple. Tama's approach suggests a different way. Instead of trying to create the perfect conditions for sleep, we can simply rest in whatever conditions are present. Instead of evaluating whether we're relaxing correctly, we can just allow the natural process of relaxation to unfold. The cat's contentment wasn't based on having achieved anything special. It arose from her willingness to be completely present to simple experience without mental elaboration. This same contentment is available to you right now, not as a reward for spiritual practice, but as your natural state when you stop complicating it. As you settle into sleep tonight, you might try being more like Tama. When you notice your mind creating stories about your experience, gently return to simple presence. When sleepy, just be sleepy. When comfortable, just be comfortable. The peace you seek isn't something to achieve, but something to stop preventing through mental complexity. Like the temple cat who taught enlightenment without saying a word, your own natural wisdom emerges when you stop trying so hard to be wise and simply allow yourself to be what you already are, aware, present, and naturally at peace beneath all the mental commentary. Master Hakuin was known throughout Japan as a serious and disciplined Zen teacher. His monastery followed strict schedules, his students practiced rigorous meditation, and his reputation was built on the traditional austere approach to spiritual training. Hakuin himself had spent decades in silent meditation, often sitting motionless for hours at a time. One day, a traveling performer arrived at the monastery seeking shelter. She was a traditional dancer who made her living entertaining at festivals and celebrations throughout the country. Her art form was considered worldly and far removed from spiritual practice, the opposite of everything Hakuin's monastery represented. The dancer, whose name was Misaki, was respectful but puzzled by the monastery's atmosphere of serious silence. During her stay, she watched the monks moving through their daily routines with careful, measured steps and wondered aloud to Hakuin, "Master, why does everyone here move so slowly and deliberately? Are you trying to avoid disturbing something?" Hakuin explained that slow, mindful movement was part of their meditation practice. "We move with awareness," he said, "to cultivate inner stillness and avoid the distractions of hasty action." Misaki nodded politely, but seemed unconvinced. "May I show you something?" she asked. With Hakuin's permission, she began to dance. Her movement was unlike anything seen in the monastery. She spun and leaped with incredible grace, her silk scarves flowing like water, her steps creating complex rhythms on the wooden floor. Yet, as Hakuin watched, he noticed something extraordinary. Despite the vigorous movement, Misaki's face showed a quality of perfect calm. Her eyes were soft and present, her breathing steady, her entire being centered despite the dynamic activity. When the dance ended, Misaki stood perfectly still, not even breathing heavily despite the energetic performance. In that moment of stillness, Hakuin could sense a depth of inner quiet that rivaled anything he had experienced in his years of motionless meditation. "How do you maintain such peace while moving so intensely?" Hakuin asked, genuinely curious. Misaki smiled. "Master, you seek stillness by avoiding movement. I find stillness within movement. The dance doesn't disturb my center, it reveals it." "But surely such vigorous activity must create mental agitation," Hakuin protested. "Watch your own mind right now," Misaki suggested. "You've been sitting calmly, yet I can see thoughts moving through your awareness. Are you disturbed by these thoughts, or can you remain centered while they arise and pass?" Hakuin had to admit that his mind contained constant subtle movement, even during supposedly still meditation. "My body dances," Misaki continued, "but my awareness remains like the center of a spinning wheel. The rim moves rapidly, but the center is perfectly still. I don't try to stop the wheel from spinning. I rest in its motionless heart." This conversation deeply affected Hakuin. He began to question whether his pursuit of external stillness had actually been limiting his understanding of true peace. That evening, he tried something unprecedented. He attempted to maintain meditative awareness while walking quickly, then while performing daily tasks with normal speed rather than deliberate slowness. To his surprise, he discovered that inner stillness didn't require outer stillness. When he stopped trying to create perfect external conditions for peace and instead learned to find the center that remained calm regardless of circumstances, his practice deepened significantly. Over the following months, Hakuin incorporated movement meditation into his teaching. He learned from Misaki that stillness is not the absence of movement, but the presence of centered awareness that remains unshaken by any external activity. Years later, when students would ask Hakuin about the most important lesson he had learned, he would often mention the dancing master who taught him that trying to stop the world in order to find peace was like trying to flatten the ocean to see its depths. True stillness, he would say, is not disturbed by movement. It includes movement within itself, like space includes all objects without being affected by them. When Misaki eventually continued on her travels, she left behind a transformed monastery where students learned that meditation could happen in any circumstance, not just in perfect silence and stillness. This story challenges a common misconception about finding inner peace. Many of us believe we need ideal conditions to feel calm. A quiet environment, comfortable circumstances, absence of stress or demands. While these conditions can certainly be helpful, depending on them entirely limits our access to peace. Misaki's teaching reveals that true stillness is not a fragile state that external movement can destroy. Instead, it's a fundamental quality of awareness itself that can be present regardless of what's happening around us or even in our bodies and minds. This understanding is particularly valuable for those who struggle to find peace in daily life. If tranquility only exists in perfect silence, then most of us would have very limited access to it. But if stillness can be found within movement, then peace becomes available in any circumstance. The image of the wheel is especially helpful. The hub of a wheel remains perfectly still even when the rim spins rapidly. Similarly, at the center of our awareness lies a stillness that isn't disturbed by the movement of thoughts, emotions, or external events. Learning to rest in this center, rather than trying to slow down the wheel, is a key to finding peace in any situation. This teaching applies directly to sleep as well. Many people believe they need perfect silence and stillness to rest deeply. While external quiet can certainly help, true restorative sleep comes from finding inner stillness that doesn't depend on external conditions being perfect. When you notice sounds or movements that might typically disturb your rest, you can practice finding the still center within awareness that remains unaffected by these disturbances. Like Misaki dancing with perfect inner calm, you can learn to rest peacefully even when conditions aren't ideal. As you prepare for sleep tonight, remember that the peace you seek isn't fragile or dependent on everything being just right. It's the fundamental stillness of awareness itself, always present at the center of experience, waiting to be recognized regardless of what else might be happening. In a busy town along the main road between Tokyo and Kyoto lived an innkeeper named Yamada. His inn was always full of travelers, merchants, and pilgrims, creating constant noise and activity from dawn until well past midnight. Guests would arrive at all hours, horses needed tending, meals required preparation, and disputes occasionally broke out that needed his intervention. From the outside, Yamada's life appeared to be the opposite of peaceful. He rarely had a quiet moment, never knew what emergency might arise next, and seemed to live in perpetual motion. Other innkeepers in town complained constantly about the stress of their work, but Yamada remained remarkably calm and cheerful despite the chaos surrounding him. A traveling monk named Dogen, who had studied at several monasteries, stayed at Yamada's inn for a week while recovering from illness. Dogen was puzzled by the innkeeper's serene demeanor amidst such constant commotion. "Yamada-san," Dogen said one evening after a particularly hectic day, "I've been observing you all week. Guests wake you in the middle of the night, children run screaming through your halls, merchants argue loudly over their meals, yet you seem more peaceful than many monks I know who live in silent retreats. What's your secret?" Yamada laughed warmly. "Secret? I have no secret. I simply run an inn. But how do you maintain such calm in such chaos?" Dogen pressed. "At the monastery where I trained, we needed perfect silence for meditation. Yet you seem to meditate constantly, even in the middle of noise and activity." Yamada paused in his work of cleaning tables and considered the question. "Tell me, monk, when you sit in meditation in your quiet monastery, what are you listening to?" "The silence," Dogen replied. "We listen to the silence and try to keep our minds still. And when sounds arise, What do you do? We try to ignore them or wish they would go away so we can return to silence. Yamada nodded thoughtfully. I used to think like that when I first took over this inn from my father. I was constantly frustrated by interruptions, always wishing for quiet so I could have some peace. I was miserable. What changed? Dogen asked. One night, when the inn was particularly noisy with a group of celebration travelers, I was lying in bed feeling sorry for myself when I had a realization. I was fighting against the very nature of running an inn. It would be like a fish complaining about water or a bird being upset about air. Yamada resumed cleaning as he continued his explanation. I realized that the noise and activity weren't preventing me from finding peace. They were the actual conditions within which I needed to find peace. So, instead of waiting for silence, I began to listen to the sounds differently. How do you mean? Dogen asked with genuine interest. Instead of hearing noise as a problem, I began to hear it as music, Yamada explained. The sound of footsteps became rhythm, conversations became melody, even arguments became part of the composition. Instead of trying to escape the sounds, I learned to rest within them. That evening, Dogen sat quietly in the inn's common room, experimenting with Yamada's approach. At first, the various sounds seemed chaotic and disturbing. But gradually, as he stopped fighting against them and began to listen with acceptance, something shifted. The noise didn't disappear, but his resistance to it did. In that shift, he found a quality of peace that didn't require silence. It's remarkable, Dogen told Yamada the next morning. When I stopped trying to push away the sounds, I found stillness within them. Yes, Yamada agreed. And now you understand why I can rest peacefully even in the middle of activity. Peace isn't something that happens in the absence of life. It's something that can be present within life itself. Before leaving the inn, Dogen asked Yamada if he had ever considered becoming a formal student of Zen. Yamada smiled. Every moment here is my Zen practice. Every guest is my teacher. Every sound is my meditation bell. Why would I need to go somewhere else to find what's already here? After returning to his monastery, Dogen found that his meditation practice had been transformed by his week with the innkeeper. He no longer needed perfect silence to find inner quiet. He had learned that true peace includes rather than excludes the sounds of life. Years later, when Dogen became a respected teacher, he would often tell his students about the innkeeper who taught him that enlightenment doesn't require escaping the world, but learning to find the sacred within the ordinary, the silent within the sound, the still within the moving. Yamada's teaching addresses one of the most common obstacles to inner peace, the belief that we need to escape our circumstances to find tranquility. The innkeeper couldn't change the fundamental nature of his work, but he could transform his relationship to its challenges. His shift from fighting noise to embracing it as music illustrates a profound principle of Zen practice. Resistance to what is already happening creates suffering, while acceptance of present conditions opens the door to peace. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on improving difficult situations, but rather finding inner calm that doesn't depend on external circumstances being different. Yamada's discovery that he could rest within activity rather than needing to escape from it has particular relevance for modern life. Most of us live with constant background noise, interruptions, and demands on our attention. If peace were only possible in perfect quiet, it would remain largely inaccessible. But Yamada's example shows that we can learn to find the silence within sound, the stillness within movement, the rest within activity. This isn't about tolerating noise, but about discovering a deeper quality of peace that includes, rather than excludes, the sounds of life. For those preparing for sleep, this teaching offers freedom from the need for perfect conditions. While it's certainly helpful to create as peaceful an environment as possible, your capacity for deep rest doesn't have to depend entirely on external silence. When sounds arise that might typically disturb your sleep, you can practice Yamada's approach. Instead of fighting against the sounds, try listening to them as part of a larger symphony. Instead of needing them to stop, see if you can find rest within them. This shift from resistance to acceptance often transforms our experience dramatically. The sounds don't necessarily change, but our relationship to them does. In that change of relationship, we discover a peace that's more stable and reliable because it doesn't require the world to be different than its island. As you settle into rest tonight, remember Yamada's wisdom. Peace doesn't require escaping life, but learning to find the sacred silence that exists at the heart of all experience, available even in the midst of activity and sound. This inner stillness is always present, waiting to be recognized, whether your environment is perfectly quiet or filled with the music of life itself. Eisai had been practicing meditation at Master Dogen's monastery for over 2 years, but he felt like a complete failure. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't achieve the peaceful states he observed in other students. During sitting meditation, he would force his spine rigid and fight against every wandering thought. He tried to control his breathing, empty his mind, and create the perfect meditative experience through sheer willpower. The harder Eisai tried, the more agitated he became. His shoulders would tense with effort, his jaw would clench with concentration, and his mind would race with frustration about his inability to be peaceful. After meditation sessions, he felt more stressed than when he began. Other students seemed to slip naturally into serene states, while Eisai struggled just to sit still for 30 minutes without internal warfare. He began to wonder if he lacked some essential quality needed for Zen practice. One morning, after a particularly difficult meditation session where he had fought against his thoughts for an hour, Eisai approached Master Dogen in desperation. "Master," he said, "I've been practicing as hard as I can for 2 years, but I'm getting worse, not better. I try to make my mind peaceful, but it becomes more agitated. I try to sit perfectly, but my body becomes tense. I try to be present, but I get lost in trying. What am I doing wrong?" Master Dogen listened carefully to Eisai's complaint. When the student finished, the master asked a simple question. "When you try to fall asleep at night, does trying help you sleep?" Eisai paused, confused by what seemed like an unrelated question. "No, master. The harder I try to fall asleep, the more awake I become." "And how do you actually fall asleep?" The master continued. "I stop trying and just let it happen naturally." Dogen nodded. "Your meditation is like trying to fall asleep. The more you force it, the more it resists you." "But master," Eisai protested, "surely meditation requires effort and discipline." "There's a difference between effort and force," Dogen explained. "Right now, you're using the wrong kind of effort. You're trying to create a particular experience instead of allowing awareness to be what it naturally island." "I don't understand the difference." Dogen gestured toward a tree visible through the window. "Does that tree try to be a tree? Does it force its leaves to grow or struggle to stand upright? No, it just naturally grows according to its nature. Yet it's not passive or lazy. It responds to sunlight, sends down roots, adapts to weather. There's tremendous activity, but no forcing. That afternoon, Dogen gave Aisai a new instruction. For the next week, don't try to meditate. Just sit and be curious about what's already here. Don't try to change anything or achieve any particular state. Simply notice what happens when you stop forcing. Aisai felt uncertain about this approach. After years of trying harder, the idea of not trying at all seemed like giving up. But he was desperate enough to experiment with Dogen's suggestion. The next morning, instead of forcing his posture into perfect position, Aisai sat comfortably and allowed his body to find its natural alignment. Instead of fighting his thoughts, he watched them with gentle curiosity. Instead of trying to create peace, he noticed the awareness that was observing both agitation and calm. Something remarkable happened. When Aisai stopped trying to force meditation to be different than it was, a natural settling began to occur. His breathing slowed on its own. His muscles relaxed without effort. His mind, no longer being pushed around, began to settle like muddy water, becoming clear when left undisturbed. By the end of the week, Aisai had experienced deeper peace than in all his previous months of forcing. When he reported this to Master Dogen, the teacher smiled. "You discovered the difference between effortless effort and effortful effort," Dogen said. "Now you know that the awareness you were trying so hard to create was already here, waiting to be recognized." From that point forward, Aisai's practice transformed completely. He learned to approach meditation like tending a garden, providing the right conditions, and allowing natural processes to unfold rather than trying to force flowers to bloom. Years later, when students would come to Aisai struggling with their own practice, he would tell them, "Stop trying to meditate and start allowing meditation to happen through you." The difference is like the difference between pushing a river and flowing with it. This story illustrates one of the most important distinctions in Zen practice, the difference between allowing and forcing. Aisai's initial approach was based on the assumption that spiritual states must be created through effort and control. But this kind of trying actually interferes with the natural peace that's already present. The comparison to falling asleep is particularly apt because sleep is something that happens to us rather than something we do. The more we try to force sleep, the more elusive it becomes. Sleep arrives when we create the right conditions and then get out of our own way. This principle applies to many aspects of life, not just meditation and sleep. Creativity flows more easily when we stop forcing it. Relationships deepen when we stop trying to control them. Even problem solving often happens more effectively when we allow solutions to emerge rather than grinding them out through mental effort. The tree metaphor that Master Dogen used reveals the nature of effortless effort. Trees don't force themselves to grow, yet they're constantly active, reaching toward light, extending roots, adapting to conditions. This is activity without strain, responsiveness without force. In Zen terms, this approach is called wo wei, or not doing. It doesn't mean being passive or lazy, but rather acting in harmony with natural processes instead of fighting against them. It's the difference between swimming with a current and swimming against it. For those seeking peaceful sleep, this teaching is especially relevant. Many people try to force themselves to relax, which creates the paradox of stressing about stress relief. Instead, we can create conditions that support natural rest and then allow the body's wisdom to take over. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Aisai's discovery. Instead of trying to make your mind quiet or force your body to relax, simply notice what's already here. Allow your breathing to find its own rhythm. Let your muscles release in their own time. Trust the natural intelligence of your body to move toward rest without your micromanagement. The peace you seek isn't something you must create through effort. It's something that emerges naturally when you stop interfering with it through excessive trying. In a remote mountain monastery lived a Zen master named Gute, who had developed an unusual reputation. Students who came seeking his teaching would often find him napping under a large pine tree in the monastery garden. At first, many visitors assumed he was simply old and lazy, but those who stayed longer began to notice something extraordinary about his presence. Even while appearing to sleep, Gute seemed to be teaching. Students would sit near him with their questions and problems, and somehow, without the master speaking a word, insights would arise in their minds. Solutions to long-standing difficulties would become clear. Peace would settle over agitated hearts. One ambitious young monk named Joso traveled to the monastery specifically to study with Gute. Joso had heard conflicting reports about this teacher, some calling him enlightened, others dismissing him as a fraud who did nothing but sleep. When Joso arrived, he found Gute exactly as described, resting peacefully under his tree, apparently fast asleep. Joso waited respectfully for the master to wake up and begin teaching. Hours passed. Gute continued sleeping. As evening approached, Joso grew impatient. He had traveled for days to receive instruction from this supposedly wise teacher, only to find a man who seemed to do nothing but nap. Finally, Joso cleared his throat loudly to wake the master. Gute opened his eyes slowly and looked at Joso with a gentle smile. "Yes?" "Master Gute," Joso said formally, "I have come seeking your teaching. When will you begin instructing students?" "I've been teaching you all afternoon," Gute replied calmly. Joso looked confused. "But you were sleeping. How can you teach while sleeping?" "Who told you I was sleeping?" Gute asked with interest. "I could see with my own eyes. You were lying under the tree with your eyes closed, breathing slowly, completely still." Gute nodded. "And what did you do while I was in this state?" "I sat quietly and waited for you to wake up." "Ah," said Gute, "so you learned to sit quietly and wait." That's the first lesson. Joso felt frustrated by what seemed like word games. "Master, I need real teaching about meditation, enlightenment, the nature of reality. I can't learn anything meaningful from watching someone sleep." "Can't you?" Gute asked. "Tell me, while you sat watching me, what was the quality of your mind?" Joso paused to consider. "I suppose it was relatively calm. I wasn't thinking about much, except waiting." "And your body?" "It was relaxed from sitting still for so long." "Your breathing?" "It slowed down to match the peaceful atmosphere." Gute smiled. "So, in the presence of someone who appeared to be doing nothing, you naturally became calm, relaxed, and present. How is this not teaching?" Over the following days, Joso continued to sit with Gute during his frequent naps. Initially, he felt like he was wasting time, but gradually he began to appreciate the profound stillness that surrounded the master even in apparent sleep. Joso noticed that his own mind became extraordinarily quiet in Gute's presence. Problems that had seemed urgent began to feel less pressing. Anxiety about his spiritual progress dissolved into simple contentment with the present moment. One afternoon, while sitting beside the apparently sleeping master, Joso had a sudden realization. Gute wasn't teaching through words or actions, but through being. His mere presence, his embodiment of complete peace, was transmitting something that no lecture could convey. When Gute opened his eyes that evening, Joso said, "Master, I think I understand now. You're not sleeping. You're demonstrating what complete rest looks like." "And what does complete rest look like?" Gute asked. "It looks like someone who doesn't need to be anywhere else or doing anything else. Someone who is so completely present that even sleep becomes a teaching." Gute laughed delightedly. "Now you're beginning to understand. Most people think teaching requires talking, demonstrating, explaining. But the deepest teaching happens through presence itself. But how do you maintain such presence even while sleeping?" "Who says I'm sleeping?" Gute replied with a twinkle in his eye. "Perhaps I'm more awake than I've ever been. When you stop trying to be awake in the conventional sense, you discover a deeper wakefulness that includes rest within itself." Joso stayed at the monastery for several months, learning to understand presence as a teaching in itself. When he finally left, other students asked him what he had learned from the master who slept all the time. "I learned that the deepest wisdom is often transmitted in silence," Joso replied, "and that true wakefulness doesn't exclude rest, but includes it. Master Gute taught me more while appearing to sleep than I had learned from years of active study elsewhere." This story reveals a profound truth about how transformation actually occurs. We often assume that change requires intense effort, constant activity, and direct instruction. But Gute's teaching demonstrates that presence itself can be more powerful than any technique or explanation. The master's apparent sleeping was actually a demonstration of complete acceptance and non-resistance. He had achieved such harmony with natural rhythms that rest and awareness had become unified. His sleep was not unconsciousness, but a different quality of consciousness, one that included rest within awareness rather than seeing them as opposites. Joso's experience shows how being in the presence of someone who embodies peace can naturally evoke peace in others. This happens not through effort or transmission of information, but through a kind of resonance. Just as tuning forks will synchronize their vibrations when placed near each other, consciousness has a tendency to harmonize with whatever it encounters. This teaching has practical implications for how we approach both rest and awakening. Many of us treat sleep as the opposite of awareness, a state we fall into when consciousness shuts down. But Gute's example suggests that rest and awareness can coexist, that we can be simultaneously deeply relaxed and gently awake. This understanding can transform our approach to sleep. Instead of trying to knock ourselves unconscious or escape from awareness, we can learn to rest within awareness. Sleep becomes not a loss of consciousness, but a different quality of consciousness, one that includes the body's natural restoration process within the field of gentle awareness. Gute's teaching method also reveals something about the nature of non-striving. He wasn't trying to teach, yet teaching happened naturally through his presence. He wasn't working to help others, yet his very being was beneficial. This is the essence of Wu Wei, effectiveness arising from being rather than doing. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Gute's approach. Instead of trying to fall asleep, try simply being present to the process of rest. Allow awareness to include the body's natural settling without trying to control or hurry it. Like Joso sitting in the presence of the peaceful master, you can let your system naturally attune to the rhythm of rest. You don't need to force sleep to happen any more than Gute needed to force teaching to occur. Both arise naturally when conditions are right and when we stop interfering with natural processes through excessive effort. The deepest rest comes not from escaping awareness, but from allowing awareness to include rest within itself, discovering that wakefulness and sleep are not opposites, but different expressions of the same fundamental consciousness. Master Kyogen was known throughout the region as the most demanding and critical teacher in all of Japan. Students would leave his monastery in tears, convinced they were failures who could never understand Zen. His teaching methods seemed designed to break down confidence rather than build it up. He would point out every flaw, criticize every answer, and dismiss most attempts at understanding with apparent contempt. Few students could endure Kyogen's harsh treatment for long, but those who did often became exceptional teachers themselves. Other masters wondered what made Kyogen's methods so effective despite their severity. A young monk named Tenzo arrived at Kyogen's monastery, having heard about the master's fearsome reputation. Tenzo was particularly sensitive to criticism, having grown up with harsh, demanding parents who never seemed satisfied with his efforts. Despite his fears, he felt drawn to study with Kyogen, hoping to find the strength he felt he lacked. From the first day, Kyogen treated Tenzo exactly as he treated all students. He criticized Tenzo's meditation posture, called his understanding shallow, and seemed to find fault with everything he did. Tenzo felt crushed, his old wounds of inadequacy reopening under the master's relentless criticism. After 2 months of this treatment, Tenzo was ready to leave. He felt worse about himself than when he arrived and couldn't see how such harsh treatment could lead to enlightenment. The night before his planned departure, he sat alone in the monastery garden, feeling like a complete failure. As he sat there, Tenzo heard voices coming from the master's quarters. Through an open window, he could see Kyogen speaking with his senior assistant, apparently unaware that anyone could overhear. "How is the young monk Tenzo progressing?" the assistant asked. To Tenzo's amazement, Kyogen's voice was completely different from the harsh tone he used in teaching. It was warm, gentle, filled with genuine care. "Tenzo has extraordinary potential," Kyogen said softly. "His sensitivity, which makes him suffer under criticism, is actually his greatest strength. He feels everything deeply, which means he can develop profound compassion. But first, he must learn that his worth doesn't depend on external approval." "But Master," the assistant said, "your criticism seems to be crushing him rather than strengthening him." Kyogen sighed deeply. "Yes, I know it's painful for him. It's painful for me to watch. But Tenzo spent his childhood believing that love had to be earned through perfection. Until he learns that his essential nature is worthy of respect, regardless of performance, he'll never be free." How does harsh criticism teach him this? By showing him that even the worst criticism imaginable cannot touch who he really is, Kyogen explained. "When he stops trying to earn my approval and starts recognizing his own inherent value, the criticism will bounce off him like rain off a mountain. That's when he'll be ready for real teaching." Tenzo listened in shock. Everything he had interpreted as cruelty was actually a form of medicine designed to cure him of his need for external validation. The next morning, instead of leaving, Tenzo approached his daily interactions with Kyogen differently. When the master criticized his meditation, instead of feeling crushed, Tenzo listened for what might be useful in the feedback while not taking the harsh tone personally. "Your posture is lazy," Kyogen said during morning meditation. "You sit like a bag of rice." For the first time, instead of feeling shame, Tenzo simply adjusted his posture and noticed that the criticism, while bluntly delivered, contained helpful information. The harsh tone no longer seemed like a judgment of his worth as a person. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. As Tenzo stopped trying to earn Kyogen's approval, he began to experience his own inner stability. The master's criticism continued, but it no longer had the power to devastate him. One day, after Kyogen had delivered a particularly sharp critique of Tenzo's understanding, the student looked directly at his teacher and smiled peacefully. "Thank you, Master," Tenzo said with genuine gratitude. "I can see the wisdom in your words without needing you to deliver them kindly." For the first time, Kyogen smiled back. From that day forward, his teaching style with Tenzo became gentler, but it didn't matter, because Tenzo no longer needed gentleness to feel secure in his own worth. Years later, when Tenzo became a teacher himself, students were struck by his extraordinary combination of honest feedback and warm compassion. When they asked him how he learned to balance truth-telling with kindness, he would say, "I had a teacher who loved me enough to help me discover that my worth wasn't dependent on anyone's opinion, including his own." This story reveals something important about the relationship between criticism and self-worth. Kyogen's seemingly harsh method was actually designed to help Tenzo discover that his essential value couldn't be damaged by external judgment. However, this approach worked only because underneath the harsh exterior was genuine care and wisdom about what Tenzo specifically needed. The story doesn't suggest that harsh criticism is generally helpful or that we should seek out people who treat us badly. Most criticism that feels crushing is not delivered with Kyogen's underlying wisdom and compassion. The key insight is that our reactions to criticism often reveal our own attachments to external validation. When we depend on others' approval for our sense of worth, any criticism becomes a threat to our identity. But when we recognize our inherent value that doesn't depend on performance or others' opinions, criticism can become simply information that we can evaluate objectively. This teaching is particularly relevant for the self-criticism that often keeps us awake at night. Many of us have internalized harsh voices from our past, replaying judgments and criticisms long after the original situations have ended. We lie in bed, rehearsing conversations where we were criticized or berating ourselves for mistakes and failures. Tenzo's journey suggests a different approach. Instead of trying to silence the critical voices or defend against them, we can learn to recognize that these judgments, however harsh, cannot actually touch our fundamental worth. Like rain on a mountain, they may make noise, but they don't change the essential nature of what they fall upon. This doesn't mean accepting truly harmful treatment from others or dismissing legitimate feedback. It means developing the inner stability that allows us to hear information without allowing it to define our self-worth. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might notice any critical voices that arise in your mind. Instead of fighting them or believing them completely, you can practice Tenzo's discovery. These voices, whatever their content, cannot diminish your essential nature. They're weather patterns in the sky of consciousness, temporary and ultimately powerless to change who you fundamentally are. Brother Myoan was his own worst enemy. While other monks at the monastery struggled with external distractions, Myoan's greatest obstacle was the harsh voice in his own head that constantly pointed out his failures and inadequacies. During meditation, instead of finding peace, Myoan would berate himself for every wandering thought. "You're terrible at this," the voice would say. "Everyone else can concentrate better than you. You'll never amount to anything as a practitioner." In daily work, the same voice provided a running commentary of criticism. When he made mistakes in copying sutras, the voice called him careless and stupid. When he struggled with difficult passages, it told him he wasn't intelligent enough for serious study. When he felt tired during long meditation sessions, it accused him of being lazy and uncommitted. This internal criticism had started in childhood with demanding parents and harsh teachers, but over the years, Myoan had fully internalized these voices. He no longer needed external critics because he had become expert at criticizing himself. The irony was that Myoan's self-criticism was motivated by a genuine desire to improve. He thought that being harsh with himself would motivate better performance and spiritual growth. Instead, the constant mental abuse was exhausting him and making progress nearly impossible. Master Ijo, observing Myoan's struggle, decided to try an experiment. One day, he called Myoan to his quarters and gave him an unusual assignment. "For the next week," Ijo said, "I want you to treat yourself exactly as you would treat a beloved younger brother who was just beginning to learn about Zen practice." Myoan looked confused. "I don't understand, Master." "When your little brother made mistakes, would you call him stupid and worthless?" "Of course not," Myoan replied, horrified at the thought. "When he struggled with difficult concepts, would you tell him he wasn't intelligent enough?" "Never. I would encourage him and help him understand." "When he felt tired from practicing, would you call him lazy?" "No, I would tell him that rest is natural and that he was doing well." Ijo nodded. "For 1 week, I want you to speak to yourself the way you would speak to this beloved brother. When the critical voice arises, ask yourself, would I say this to someone I love who is trying their best?" Myoan felt skeptical about this approach. "But Master, if I'm not strict with myself, won't I become lazy and stop improving?" "Let's find out," Ijo said simply. 1 week. Treat yourself with the same kindness you would show a dear friend. The first day was difficult. Myoan's habit of self-criticism was so strong that catching and changing these thoughts required constant vigilance. During meditation, when his mind wandered and the familiar voice began its criticism, Myoan experimented with responding differently. Instead of "you're hopeless at meditation," he tried thinking, "it's natural for the mind to wander. You're learning, and learning takes time." Instead of "you're so stupid for not understanding this teaching," he practiced thinking, "this is a difficult concept. Many people struggle with it. You'll understand it when you're ready." The change in internal atmosphere was dramatic. Instead of feeling beaten down by his practice, Myoan began to feel supported by it. His meditation became more peaceful because he wasn't constantly at war with himself. His study became more enjoyable because mistakes felt like learning opportunities rather than evidence of failure. By the end of the week, Myoan was astonished by the results. Not only did he feel happier and more peaceful, but his actual performance had improved. His meditation was deeper, his understanding clearer, and his energy higher. When he reported these results to Master Ijo, the teacher smiled. "What did you discover?" "I discovered that I can motivate myself through kindness more effectively than through cruelty," Myoan said. "When I stopped wasting energy fighting myself, I had more energy available for actual practice." "And what about the fear that kindness would make you lazy?" Myoan laughed. "That was completely backwards. The criticism was what made me want to give up. The kindness made me want to keep trying." "Tell me," Ijo continued, If you had a student who came to you filled with self-doubt and harsh self-judgment, how would you help them? I would treat them with patience and compassion until they learned to see their own worth, Myoan replied without hesitation. Then perhaps you can be such a teacher to yourself. From that day forward, Myoan's practice was transformed. He learned to catch self-critical thoughts, not with more criticism, but with gentle redirection, the way a kind teacher guides a struggling student. His spiritual progress accelerated dramatically, not because he became less discriminating about his practice, but because he approached improvement from a foundation of self-respect rather than self-attack. Years later, when Myoan became known as a particularly compassionate and effective teacher, students would ask him about his methods. He would tell them, "The most important thing I learned was to become my own friend rather than my own enemy." Everything else followed from that. Myoan's story illustrates a crucial distinction between helpful and harmful self-evaluation. There's a difference between honest assessment that comes from a place of caring and harsh criticism that comes from a place of judgment and attack. The voice that called Myoan stupid and hopeless wasn't actually trying to help him improve. It was expressing old patterns of shame and inadequacy that had nothing to do with his current efforts. True motivation for growth comes from self-respect and genuine care for our own development, not from internal abuse. The experiment that Master Ijo suggested reveals how we often treat ourselves worse than we would treat anyone else. We use a tone of voice with ourselves that we would never use with a friend or even a stranger. This double standard creates unnecessary suffering and actually impedes the growth we're trying to encourage. Myoan discovered that kindness is not weakness, but strength. When we approach our mistakes and limitations with compassion, we create a safe space for genuine learning and change. When we attack ourselves for imperfections, we create internal conditions that make growth more difficult. This teaching has particular relevance for the self-critical thoughts that often arise as we prepare for sleep. Many people lie awake reviewing the day's mistakes, berating themselves for things they said or didn't say, criticizing their performance or behavior. Instead of adding exhaustion from self-criticism to the fatigue from daily life, we can practice Myoan's approach. When critical thoughts arise, we can ask ourselves, would I speak this way to someone I care about who is doing their best? This simple question can transform our internal atmosphere from hostile to supportive. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine areas for improvement or avoiding responsibility for our actions. It means approaching self-evaluation from a foundation of basic respect and care rather than judgment and attack. As you settle into rest tonight, you can practice being your own kind friend rather than your own harsh critic. Notice any voices of judgment that arise and experiment with responding to them the way you would respond to a beloved person who is struggling. This shift from self-criticism to self-compassion often creates the inner peace that makes deep, restorative sleep possible. The kindness you offer to yourself isn't just a nice gesture. It's a practical tool for creating the mental conditions that support both growth and rest. Like Myoan, you might discover that treating yourself as a friend rather than an enemy transforms not just your sleep, but your entire relationship with learning and living. Master Gute had developed a reputation for something quite unusual. He seemed to have no memory of yesterday and no concern for tomorrow. Students who came to study with him were often puzzled by his complete absorption in whatever was happening right now. A wealthy merchant named Takeshi came to visit Gute, seeking advice about a business decision that had been troubling him for months. The merchant had invested heavily in a trading venture that had failed, losing nearly half his fortune. He was consumed with regret about the decision and anxiety about how to rebuild his wealth. Master Gutei, Takeshi said during their first meeting, 6 months ago I made a terrible choice that has cost me everything. I can't stop thinking about what I should have done differently. And now I'm paralyzed by fear about my future. How can I move forward when I'm haunted by the past and terrified of making another mistake? Gutei listened carefully, then asked a simple question. What is the weather like right now? Takeshi looked confused. Master, I just told you about my financial disaster. Why are you asking about the weather? Please, Gutei said gently, just tell me about the weather. Reluctantly, Takeshi glanced toward the window. It's partly cloudy. There's a gentle breeze. The temperature is pleasant. Good, Gutei nodded. And you're breathing right now? My breathing? Takeshi felt increasingly frustrated by these seemingly irrelevant questions. It's normal, I suppose. Is it fast or slow? Deep or shallow? Despite his impatience, Takeshi paid attention to his breath. It's a bit shallow and quick, probably because I'm anxious. And the feeling of sitting on this cushion? Master, I don't understand how these details matter when my whole life is falling apart. Gutei smiled peacefully. Your life is not falling apart. Your story about your life is creating suffering. The weather is pleasant, your breathing is working perfectly, and you are safely sitting on a comfortable cushion. This is your actual life right now. But the money I lost, the decision I made. Where is this decision now? Gutei interrupted gently. Can you show it to me? Takeshi was quiet for a moment. It's in the past. And the past exists where? In my memory. So you are suffering because of thoughts about something that no longer exists and worrying about things that haven't happened yet and may never happen. But the consequences of that decision are real. I have less money now. Yes, Gutei agreed. And that is a present moment fact. You have less money today than you had before. But you are treating this present moment fact as a tragedy because you are comparing it to a past state and fearing future scenarios. Gutei gestured around his simple room. I also have less money than some people and more than others. I have less money today than I will if someone gives me some, and more money than I will if I give some away. These are just present moment conditions, no more tragic than the weather being cloudy instead of sunny. Over the following weeks, Takeshi found himself drawn back to conversations with Gutei. Each time he tried to discuss his past mistakes or future fears, the master would gently redirect his attention to immediate present experience. What do you see when you look out that window right now? How does your tea taste? What sounds are you hearing at this moment? Initially, Takeshi found this redirecting irritating. It seemed like the master was avoiding his real problems. But gradually, something began to shift. The more time he spent focused on immediate sensory experience, the less consumed he became with mental stories about past and future. One day, during a particularly pleasant conversation about the feeling of warm sunlight streaming through the window, Takeshi suddenly laughed. "Master," he said, "I just realized something strange. Right now, in this moment, I have no problems." "Ah," Gutei smiled, "you're beginning to understand. Problems exist in time, but you exist in the present moment. When you live where you are rather than where you think you should be, problems dissolve into simple present moment conditions that you can address clearly. But surely I need to plan for the future and learn from the past. Of course, Gute replied, but you can only plan and learn in the present moment. When you try to live in the past or future, you lose access to the intelligence and clarity that can actually address practical matters. From that day forward, Takeshi's approach to his business challenges changed completely. Instead of being paralyzed by regret and fear, he began making clear-headed decisions based on current conditions. His natural business intelligence, no longer clouded by mental time travel, led to surprisingly good outcomes. A year later, when people asked Takeshi how he had recovered so well from his financial losses, he would say, "I learned to live in the only time that actually exists. Everything else is just imagination, and you can't solve real problems with imaginary ones." This story illustrates one of Zen Buddhism's most practical insights. Most of our suffering comes not from present moment circumstances, but from our thoughts about past and future. Takeshi's actual present moment contained pleasant weather, comfortable seating, and functional breathing. His suffering came entirely from mental narratives about events that no longer existed and scenarios that hadn't occurred. Master Gute's gentle redirection wasn't an avoidance technique, but a return to reality. The past exists only as present moment memories, and the future exists only as present moment imagination. All our actual power to understand, decide, and act is available only in the present moment. This teaching doesn't suggest ignoring practical planning or learning from experience. Rather, it points out that effective planning and learning happen in present awareness, not in the mental loops of regret and worry that often masquerade as productive thinking. For those seeking peaceful sleep, this understanding is transformative. Much of our bedtime mental activity consists of replaying past events or rehearsing future scenarios. Neither of these mental activities can change anything, but both can keep us awake for hours. When we learn to return attention to immediate present experience, the feeling of our body against the bed, the rhythm of our breathing, the sounds in our environment, we often discover that the present moment contains no problems that require solving right now. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might practice Gute's approach. When your mind travels to past conversations or future concerns, gently ask yourself, what is my actual experience right now? Notice the simple sensory realities of this moment. Often, you'll discover that the present contains natural peace, while suffering lives only in mental stories about other times. The present moment isn't always comfortable, but it's always manageable in a way that mental time travel rarely island. When we stop trying to solve yesterday's problems or prevent tomorrow's difficulties, we can rest in the reality of now, which often contains more peace than our minds had imagined. Brother Daito had been assigned the night watch at his monastery, a duty that required staying awake from midnight until dawn to tend the fire and watch for any emergencies. Most monks considered this an undesirable assignment that interfered with normal sleep schedules, but Daito approached it with his characteristic diligence. For the first few months, Daito struggled with the night shift. His body wanted to sleep during his watch hours, and he found his mind racing with thoughts to stay alert. He would think about monastery business, plan future projects, or replay conversations from the day. Sometimes he would worry about oversleeping and letting the fire die, or imagine various disaster scenarios he might need to handle. The mental activity that Daito used to stay awake was exhausting. By morning, he felt drained not just from lack of sleep, but from hours of mental churning. His daytime rest was often disturbed by an overactive mind that had learned to stay busy throughout the night. One night, while sitting by the fire around 3 a.m., Daito noticed something different. His mind had grown quiet, not from effort, but from simple fatigue. In that quietness, he became aware of sounds he had never noticed during his months of mental busyness: the gentle crackling of the fire, wind moving through trees outside, the distant sound of a stream, even his own heartbeat. For the first time since beginning night watch, Daito felt completely present. Instead of thinking about other times and places, he was simply here, now, with the fire and the night sounds. Despite being technically awake and alert, he felt more rested than he had in months. As this natural awareness continued through the remaining hours until dawn, Daito experienced something remarkable. Each moment seemed complete in itself. The dancing flames, the shifting shadows, the gradual changes in night sounds as different creatures became active, all of it felt vivid and satisfying in a way his previous mental activity had never been. When morning came and another monk arrived to relieve him, Daito realized he felt refreshed despite having been awake all night. More puzzling still, when he went to his quarters to rest, he fell asleep easily and naturally, without the mental churning that had previously made daytime sleep difficult. That evening, Daito approached his watch duties with curiosity about what had happened. Instead of filling the time with thoughts and mental projects, he experimented with the same quality of simple presence he had discovered accidentally. Each night became a different exploration. Sometimes he focused on the immediate sensory experience of tending the fire. Other nights he listened deeply to the symphony of sounds that emerged in the silence. Always, he practiced returning his attention to whatever was actually happening right now, rather than mental commentary about it. After several weeks of this practice, Daito made a discovery that transformed his understanding of alertness and rest. He found that present moment awareness was naturally wakeful without being agitated, and naturally peaceful without being drowsy. It was a different quality of consciousness than either conventional sleep or conventional waking. Other monks began to notice changes in Daito. Despite working night shifts, he seemed more rested and peaceful than when he had followed normal schedules. His daytime meditation was deeper, his mood more stable, and his presence somehow more concentrated yet relaxed. When the abbot asked Daito about these changes, he explained his discovery. "I learned that consciousness itself doesn't need entertainment or mental activity to stay alert. When I stopped trying to manufacture wakefulness through thinking, I found a natural awareness that included both rest and alertness." "How is this different from falling asleep?" the abbot asked with interest. "When I fall asleep, awareness disappears," Daito replied. "But this is awareness remaining aware, just without all the mental commentary I usually add to it. It's like the difference between a busy marketplace and a clear mountain lake. Both can be awake, but one is agitated and the other is peaceful." The abbot was so intrigued by Daito's discovery that he occasionally joined him for night watch to experience this quality of awareness himself. He found that Daito had indeed discovered something valuable, a state of consciousness that was simultaneously restful and alert, present and peaceful. When Daito eventually returned to normal daytime duties, he brought his night watch discoveries with him. His meditation practice became effortless, and his sleep became deeply restorative because he had learned to distinguish between the natural awareness that doesn't need to be busy and the mental activity that prevents rest. Years later, when students asked Daito about the secret to peaceful sleep, He would tell them about his nights by the fire. Rest doesn't come from unconsciousness, he would say. It comes from consciousness without the extra activity we usually add to it. When awareness stops trying to be entertaining, it naturally becomes restful. Daito's discovery reveals an important distinction between alertness that comes from mental stimulation and awareness that is naturally wakeful. Most of us maintain alertness through mental activity, planning, problem-solving, remembering, or imagining. This kind of stimulated wakefulness is exhausting and prevents rest. But Daito found that awareness itself has a natural wakefulness that doesn't require mental content to sustain it. This awareness can remain present and alert while being simultaneously peaceful and restful. It's the difference between an anxious vigilance and a calm attentiveness. This discovery has profound implications for both meditation and sleep. Many people struggle with meditation because they think awareness requires effort to maintain. They work hard to stay alert, which creates the very mental agitation that prevents the peace they seek. Similarly, many people struggle with sleep because they've learned to equate rest with unconsciousness. They try to force their minds to shut down completely, not realizing that awareness can remain gently present while the body and nervous system restore themselves. Daito's experience suggests a middle way, awareness that is present but not busy, alert but not agitated, restful but not unconscious. This quality of consciousness can serve as a bridge between active waking and deep sleep, allowing for a more natural transition into rest. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Daito's discovery. Instead of trying to force your mind to become unconscious, see if you can find the natural awareness that remains present without needing to be entertained by thoughts. Notice the simple fact of being aware right now. This awareness doesn't require maintenance through mental activity. It's naturally present, naturally wakeful, and naturally peaceful when we stop adding extra layers of mental stimulation to it. Like Daito sitting by his fire, you can rest in this fundamental awareness that includes both alertness and peace within itself. This isn't a practice that requires effort, but a recognition of what's already here when we stop trying so hard to manufacture the perfect state for sleep. Master Fukurai was renowned throughout Japan not for his meditation skills or scholarly knowledge, but for something much more unusual, his extraordinary relationship with sleep. While other monks often struggled with insomnia, restless nights, or difficulty balancing sleep with spiritual practice, Fukurai had achieved something remarkable. His sleep was so profound and restorative that he could function perfectly on far less rest than others required. More intriguingly, students reported that Fukurai seemed to be practicing even while asleep. His presence during sleep was so peaceful and centered that simply being near him while he rested had a calming effect on others. Some claimed he could even answer simple questions while appearing to be completely asleep, though he would never remember these conversations upon waking. A young monk named Genshin, who suffered from chronic insomnia and anxiety about his spiritual progress, came to study with Fukurai specifically to learn his secret. Genshin had tried every technique he knew for better sleep: breathing exercises, counting methods, progressive relaxation, even meditation specifically designed for rest. Nothing had given him the deep, restorative sleep he craved. Master Fukurai, Genshin said during their first meeting, "I barely sleep 3 hours a night, and even that is fitful and disturbed. My mind races with worries and plans. I've been told you can teach the art of sacred sleep. Please help me." Fukurai smiled gently. "Before I can teach you to sleep well, tell me how you currently approach falling asleep." Genshin described his elaborate bedtime routine, specific postures, breathing techniques, visualization exercises, and mental practices designed to induce rest. He explained how he would monitor his progress towards sleep, adjust his methods when they weren't working, and often become frustrated when sleep didn't come quickly. "I see the problem," Fukurai said. "You're trying to achieve sleep instead of allowing it. Sleep is not something you do, it's something you stop preventing." "I don't understand the difference, Master. Show me how you breathe when trying to fall asleep." Genshin demonstrated his careful breathing technique, specific counts for inhalation and exhalation, precise timing, conscious control of rhythm and depth. "Now," Fukurai said, "breathe the way you breathe when you're completely absorbed in a beautiful sunset." Genshin tried this and immediately noticed the difference. When watching a sunset, his breathing became natural and effortless, neither controlled nor ignored. "That's the difference," Fukurai explained. "When you try to create sleep through technique, you maintain the very effort that prevents rest. When you allow natural processes to unfold, sleep comes by itself." Over the following weeks, Fukurai taught Genshin a radically different approach to rest. Instead of elaborate methods for inducing sleep, he learned the art of creating conditions for natural rest and then getting out of the way. "Sleep is like a cat," Fukurai explained. "If you chase it, it runs away. If you sit quietly and create a welcoming environment, it comes to you." Fukurai taught Genshin to approach bedtime not as a performance to perfect, but as a gentle transition to trust. Instead of monitoring his progress towards sleep, Genshin learned to rest in awareness without needing awareness to accomplish anything. "The consciousness that goes to sleep," Fukurai said, "is the same consciousness that wakes up. It doesn't disappear during rest. It simply stops working so hard." One evening, Fukurai demonstrated his understanding by lying down for his nightly rest while Genshin observed. The master's transition from waking to sleeping was so gradual and natural that it was impossible to identify the exact moment it occurred. There was no struggle, no effort, no apparent boundary between consciousness and rest. "Watch carefully," Fukurai had said before closing his eyes. "I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to let sleep come to me." As Genshin watched, he saw Fukurai's breathing naturally slow and deepen. His face relaxed into an expression of profound peace. His body settled into the bed like water finding its level. The entire process appeared effortless, a natural unfolding rather than an achievement. What struck Genshin most powerfully was that even while clearly asleep, Fukurai maintained a quality of presence that seemed undisturbed by the transition. It was as if awareness continued but simply changed its mode of operation. After several months of practicing Fukurai's gentle approach, Genshin's insomnia had completely resolved. More importantly, his understanding of consciousness itself had deepened. He realized that sleep was not the opposite of awareness, but a different expression of it. "Master," Genshin said during one of their final conversations, "I understand now why you call it sacred sleep. It's not that we lose consciousness during rest. We discover what consciousness is like when it stops trying to be conscious." Fukurai nodded approvingly. "Yes. Sleep is awareness returning to its natural state before effort and agenda. It's the mind's way of remembering what peace feels like. Years later, when Genshin became a teacher himself, students were struck by his unusual gift for helping others with sleep difficulties. When they asked his secret, he would say, "I learned that sleep is not something to achieve, but something to allow." When we stop chasing rest, it comes naturally, like a gentle friend who has been waiting patiently for us to stop running away. This story reveals a profound understanding about the nature of both sleep and consciousness itself. Fukurai's teaching suggests that sleep is not an interruption of awareness, but awareness in its most natural, effortless state. This perspective transforms our entire relationship with rest. Most of us approach sleep as a problem to solve or a state to create through effort. We use techniques, monitor our progress, and often become frustrated when sleep doesn't arrive on schedule. This approach, while well-intentioned, maintains the very mental activity that prevents natural rest. Fukurai's method suggests that sleep, like many natural processes, happens best when we create supportive conditions and then trust the body's innate wisdom. Just as we don't have to remember to grow our hair or digest our food, we don't have to force sleep to occur. The image of sleep as a cat that comes when called gently, but runs away when chased perfectly captures this dynamic. Sleep responds to invitation, not demand. It arrives in an atmosphere of trust, not effort. Perhaps most significantly, Fukurai's understanding reveals that the awareness we experience during waking continues during sleep, simply in a different mode. Sleep is not unconsciousness, but consciousness without agenda, awareness without effort, presence without performance. This insight can transform not just our approach to sleep, but our understanding of what consciousness island. If awareness can remain present even during rest, then perhaps what we are fundamentally is this awareness itself, which includes all states rather than being limited to any particular one. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Fukurai's approach. Instead of trying to achieve sleep, create conditions for rest, and then simply allow what wants to happen naturally. Trust that your body knows how to sleep just as it knows how to breathe and heal. Like awareness settling into its most natural state, let your consciousness rest in itself without needing to accomplish anything or go anywhere. The sleep that comes through this gentle allowing often carries a quality of sacredness that forced rest cannot provide. In a mountain monastery lived an elderly master named Myoan who had developed an unusual teaching method. Unlike other teachers who instructed students only during waking hours, Myoan claimed he could offer guidance through dreams. Students initially dismissed this as eccentricity from an aging mind, but those who stayed long enough began to experience something remarkable. Brother Kosen was one such student. He had been struggling for months with a particular koan that seemed impossible to solve. No matter how he approached it intellectually or meditated upon it, the answer remained elusive. His efforts were creating such mental tension that his sleep had become disturbed and his waking practice agitated. One evening, Master Myoan approached Kosen before bedtime. "You've been working too hard on your koan," the master observed. "Tonight, instead of trying to solve it, take it to bed with you like a beloved friend." "Take it to bed?" Kosen asked, confused. "Yes. Instead of wrestling with the koan, simply rest with it. Hold it gently in your awareness as you fall asleep, not as a problem to solve, but as a companion for the night." Kosen was skeptical, but desperate enough to try anything. That night, instead of his usual intense contemplation, he gently held the koan in his mind, like holding a sleeping child, with care but without effort. As he drifted towards sleep, something unexpected happened. The koan didn't disappear from his awareness, but seemed to settle into a deeper part of his mind. It was still present, but in a way that felt restful rather than agitating. During the night, Kosen had a vivid dream. In the dream, he was walking through a garden where every flower was actually a word from his koan. As he moved among these flowering words, they began to arrange themselves in new patterns, revealing meanings he had never considered while awake. When he woke, Kosen felt he understood the koan not through intellectual analysis, but through a kind of direct knowing that had emerged during sleep. The understanding was so clear and complete that he wondered how he could have missed it during all his waking efforts. At morning meditation, Master Myoan noticed the change in Kosen immediately. "I see you received your teaching last night," the master said with a knowing smile. "How did you know I would understand the koan through dreaming?" Kosen asked. "The mind that tries too hard while awake often knows exactly what it needs," Myoan replied. "But sometimes this knowledge can only emerge when the trying mind relaxes its grip. Sleep provides a natural opening where understanding can arise without interference." Intrigued by this experience, Kosen began to experiment with what he came to think of as dream practice. Instead of viewing sleep as time away from spiritual work, he learned to see it as a different kind of laboratory where insights could develop in their own way. He discovered that problems he struggled with during the day would often resolve themselves during sleep, not through effort, but through a natural process of integration that occurred when conscious control relaxed. Other students began to notice Kosen's accelerated progress and asked him about his methods. When he explained about working with dreams and sleep as part of practice, many were initially skeptical. "How can sleeping lead to enlightenment?" One student asked. "Isn't sleep the opposite of awareness?" Kosen had learned something from his experiments. "Sleep isn't the opposite of awareness," he explained. "It's awareness exploring itself in a different way. When the waking mind stops trying to control everything, deeper intelligence can emerge." Master Myoan, overhearing this conversation, added his own perspective. "The Zen path includes all states of consciousness, not just the ones where we feel in control. Dreams, sleep, and even deep rest are part of the fabric of awakening." He gestured toward the setting sun day. "Day and night are not opposites but partners in a single cycle. Similarly, sleeping and waking are not separate from practice but complementary aspects of the same process of understanding." Over time, Kosen developed such skill in working with sleep as a teacher that other students began to seek his guidance on what they called night practice. He would tell them, "Don't try to use your dreams or control your sleep. Simply trust that consciousness is always working toward understanding, even when you're not consciously directing the process." When Kosen eventually became a teacher himself, he was known for his unique integration of sleeping and waking practice. Students would come to him specifically to learn how to work with their dreams and nighttime experiences as part of their spiritual development. "The mind that seeks truth never really stops seeking," he would tell them. "It simply changes its method of inquiry during sleep. Your job is to trust this process and create conditions where night wisdom can emerge naturally." This story reveals a beautiful understanding about the continuity of consciousness and the learning process. Myoan and Kosen discovered that the intelligence seeking understanding doesn't stop working when we fall asleep. It simply shifts to a different mode of operation. In our culture, we often view sleep as downtime, a break from productive activity, including spiritual practice. But Kosen's experience suggests that sleep can be a different kind of laboratory, where insights develop through non-linear processes that complement our waking efforts. The image of taking a koan to bed, like a beloved friend, captures a gentle approach to working with challenging questions. Instead of forcing understanding through intellectual effort, this method involves creating a loving relationship with not knowing, allowing questions to be present without demanding immediate answers. This approach recognizes that consciousness has its own intelligence for processing information and developing understanding. Sometimes solutions emerge through direct effort, but sometimes they arise through the mysterious integrative processes that occur during rest. The insight that day and night are partners rather than opposites extends to our understanding of consciousness itself. If we view waking and sleeping as complementary aspects of a single process, sleep becomes part of practice rather than a break from it. This doesn't mean we should try to control our dreams or force our sleep to be productive. Rather, it suggests approaching rest with the same respect and trust we bring to other aspects of spiritual practice. For those interested in this approach, the key is gentle intention rather than forceful technique. Before sleep, you might simply set a quiet intention to remain open to whatever insights or understanding want to emerge naturally during rest. Like Kosen, you might find that the relaxation of conscious control during sleep allows deeper intelligence to surface. Problems that seem intractable during the day sometimes resolve themselves through the mysterious alchemy of night consciousness. As you settle into sleep tonight, you can trust that consciousness continues its work of integration and understanding even as you rest. Sleep becomes not an escape from awareness, but awareness exploring itself in its most natural, effortless state. Master Rinzai lived during a time of great civil unrest in Japan. War had torn apart communities, and many people harbored deep resentments against those who had harmed their families or destroyed their homes. Rinzai's own monastery had been burned down by soldiers, and several of his beloved students had been killed in the violence. Among the soldiers responsible for this destruction was a captain named Yoshimoto, known for his particular cruelty toward Buddhist monks. Yoshimoto viewed monks as weak and useless to society, and he took pleasure in humiliating them whenever possible. He had personally overseen the burning of Rinzai's monastery and had shown no mercy when the younger monks begged for their lives. For months after the attack, Rinzai struggled with intense anger and thoughts of revenge. During meditation, instead of finding peace, he would replay the terrible events over and over. His sleep was haunted by nightmares of the burning monastery and the screams of his students. The hatred he felt toward Yoshimoto seemed to poison everything, making spiritual practice nearly impossible. One night, after another sleepless period spent consumed with rage, Rinzai had a profound realization. This anger is destroying me more effectively than Yoshimoto ever could, he thought. I survived his attack on my body and my monastery, but I'm allowing his actions to attack my spirit every single day. Rinzai understood that his resentment wasn't hurting Yoshimoto at all. The captain was probably sleeping peacefully while Rinzai tormented himself with memories and fantasies of revenge. The anger that felt like strength was actually a form of continued victimization, allowing Yoshimoto's cruelty to keep damaging him long after the original attacks. But how could he forgive such terrible acts? How could he release anger that felt so justified, so righteous, so completely reasonable? Rinzai spent weeks contemplating this question until he arrived at a distinction that changed everything. He realized he didn't need to forgive Yoshimoto's actions, which were indeed cruel and unjustifiable. Instead, he could forgive the suffering that had created such cruelty in the first place. Yoshimoto acts from deep pain, Rinzai reflected. Someone filled with genuine peace and happiness doesn't burn monasteries or kill innocent people. His violence comes from his own unhealed wounds, his own fear, his own disconnection from his true nature. This insight didn't excuse Yoshimoto's behavior or minimize the harm he had caused. But it allowed Rinzai to see the captain as a deeply suffering human being rather than simply a monster. This shift in perspective created space for something unexpected: compassion. Rinzai began a practice he called loving the enemy's pain. Instead of sending hatred toward Yoshimoto, he would send compassion toward whatever suffering had created such a violent, disconnected person. He would meditate on the possibility that Yoshimoto might someday find healing and peace, not because he deserved it, but because all beings deserve freedom from the pain that creates cruelty. The change in Rinzai's inner life was dramatic. The anger that had been consuming his energy gradually dissolved, replaced by a profound sadness for the waste of human potential that violence represents. His sleep became peaceful again, and his meditation deepened beyond what it had been even before the attack. 3 years later, something extraordinary happened. Captain Yoshimoto appeared at the new monastery Rinzai had built, but not as an enemy. The captain was dressed as a beggar, thin and hollow-eyed, clearly having experienced his own devastating losses in the continuing war. "Master Rinzai," Yoshimoto said, falling to his knees before the monk he had once tormented, "I have come to ask for your forgiveness. The war is over, and I can no longer escape the weight of what I have done. I destroyed your monastery and killed your students. I know I have no right to ask, but I am drowning in guilt and shame." Other monks at the monastery were shocked to see their master's former enemy and wondered how Rinzai would respond. Some expected him to turn Yoshimoto away or demand some form of justice. Instead, Rinzai helped the weeping man to his feet with genuine gentleness. "Yoshimoto," he said quietly, "I forgave you years ago, not for your sake but for mine. Now I see you are ready to forgive yourself." "How can I forgive myself for such terrible acts?" Yoshimoto asked through his tears. "The same way I forgave you," Rinzai replied. "By understanding that the person who committed those acts was drowning in pain and confusion. That person was not your true nature any more than my anger was mine." Yoshimoto stayed at the monastery for several months, working to make amends and learning meditation practices that helped him process his guilt and shame. When he eventually left, he had transformed from a bitter, violent man into someone dedicated to preventing the kind of suffering he had once caused. Years later, when students would ask Rinzai about forgiveness, he would tell them, "Forgiveness is not about condoning harmful actions. It's about refusing to let those actions continue harming you. When you forgive, you don't change the past, but you free yourself from being imprisoned by it." This story reveals the distinction between forgiveness and approval that many people struggle with. Rinzai didn't pretend that burning monasteries and killing innocent people were acceptable acts. Instead, he found a way to release his own suffering without minimizing the reality of harm that had been done. His insight about forgiving the pain behind the actions rather than the actions themselves offers a practical pathway through one of forgiveness's greatest obstacles: the feeling that forgiveness somehow excuses harmful behavior. By directing compassion toward the suffering that creates cruelty, we can find freedom from resentment without compromising our clarity about right and wrong. Rinzai's practice of loving the enemy's pain demonstrates that forgiveness is ultimately about our own healing rather than the other person's worthiness. The anger and resentment we carry hurt us far more than they hurt those who wronged us. Releasing these burdens is an act of self-care, not weakness. This understanding is particularly important for peaceful sleep. Many of us lie awake at night replaying old hurts, imagining confrontations with people who harmed us, or feeling our bodies tense with remembered anger. These mental patterns keep us trapped in past pain and prevent the deep rest our bodies and minds need. When old resentments arise as you prepare for sleep tonight, you might try Rinzai's approach. Instead of trying to forgive actions that may be truly unforgivable, you can send compassion toward whatever pain or confusion created those actions. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or putting yourself at risk for further harm. It means freeing yourself from the continued damage that resentment creates. The beautiful truth is that forgiveness, properly understood, is always available because it depends only on our willingness to release our own suffering, not on anyone else changing or apologizing. Like Rinzai, we can find peace without waiting for justice or acknowledgement from those who hurt us. Sister Eshun had committed what she considered an unforgivable sin. 3 years earlier, while serving as a caregiver for her aging teacher, Master Dogen, she had made a critical error in preparing his medicine. Her mistake had led to his death, and she had been carrying the weight of guilt and self-hatred ever since. Despite the other monk's assurance that her error was an honest mistake that anyone could have made, Eshun couldn't forgive herself. She believed that her carelessness had robbed the world of a great teacher and that she deserved to suffer for the rest of her life as punishment for her negligence. This guilt had destroyed Eshun's ability to practice effectively. During meditation, instead of finding peace, she would torture herself with thoughts about what she should have done differently. Her sleep was haunted by nightmares where she relived the tragic events over and over. She had lost weight, developed chronic headaches, and seemed to be aging rapidly under the burden of self-condemnation. The new abbot, Master Kizan, watched Eshun's self-destruction with growing concern. He had tried to counsel her many times, explaining that Master Dogen wouldn't have wanted her to suffer so intensely for an honest mistake. But Eshun remained convinced that her guilt was appropriate and that any attempt to forgive herself would be a betrayal of her beloved teacher's memory. One day, Kazan decided to try a different approach. He called Eshun to his quarters and presented her with a hypothetical situation. "Eshun," he said, "imagine that another student had made the same mistake you made. Suppose this student came to you now, 3 years later, still consumed with guilt and self-hatred. What would you say to her?" "That's different," Eshun replied immediately. "If it was someone else, I would tell her that Master Dogen forgave honest mistakes and that continuing to punish herself serves no one." "Why is it different?" "Because it was my responsibility. I was the one who was supposed to care for him." Kazan nodded thoughtfully. "So you believe that you should be held to a different standard than everyone else? That your mistakes are somehow worse than identical mistakes made by others?" Eshun paused, recognizing the inconsistency in her thinking, but unable to resolve it. "I just feel like I should have been more careful." "Should have been?" Kizan repeated. "Tell me, what good does should have been accomplish now?" "It reminds me to be more careful in the future." "And has this guilt made you more careful, or has it made you so anxious and distracted that you're more likely to make mistakes?" Eshun had to admit that her guilt-ridden state made her nervous and prone to errors in her current duties. The very remorse that was supposed to prevent future mistakes was actually increasing the likelihood of them. Master Kizan, Eshin said, "I understand intellectually that my guilt isn't helpful, but I can't seem to stop feeling it. How do I forgive myself for something so terrible?" Instead of answering directly, Kazan asked another question. "What would Master Dogen say to you right now if he could speak?" Eshin's eyes filled with tears. "He would tell me to stop tormenting myself. He always said that sincere regret was useful, but self-hatred was just another form of selfishness." Selfishness? He taught that excessive guilt is still about the self. It's a way of making ourselves the center of the story instead of focusing on how to serve others better. Kazan smiled gently. So, continuing to punish yourself is actually dishonoring his teachings. This realization hit Eshin like a thunderbolt. In trying to honor Master Dogen's memory through her guilt, she had been violating his most fundamental teachings about letting go of self-centeredness and focusing on compassionate service. "But how do I actually forgive myself?" she asked. "How do I stop the thoughts and feelings that come automatically?" "The same way you would help someone else forgive themselves," Kazan replied. "With patience, understanding, and recognition that the person who made that mistake was doing her best with the understanding she had at the time." Over the following months, Kazan taught Eshin to practice self-compassion the way she would practice any other meditation technique. When guilt arose, instead of pushing it away or indulging it, she learned to meet it with the same kindness she would offer a friend in pain. She began to distinguish between regret, which was appropriate and useful, and self-hatred, which was destructive and served no purpose. She could feel genuine sorrow about Master Dogen's death and her role in it, while still treating herself with basic human dignity. The transformation was gradual, but profound. As Ishun's self-compassion grew, her ability to serve others expanded dramatically. She became known throughout the monastery for her skill in helping other students who struggled with guilt, shame, and self-criticism. One day, a young monk who had made a serious error came to Eshun for guidance. As she comforted him and helped him find perspective on his mistake, she realized something beautiful. Her own experience with guilt and forgiveness had become a source of wisdom she could offer others. "Sister Eshun," the young monk said, "how did you learn to be so understanding about mistakes and self-forgiveness?" She smiled with gentle sadness. "I learned from making a terrible mistake myself and discovering that self-hatred is just another form of violence that the world doesn't need. Master Dogen's death taught me many things, but perhaps the most important was that we honor our teachers not by punishing ourselves for our failures, but by learning from them and using that learning to help others." This story addresses one of the most difficult forms of forgiveness, forgiving ourselves. Many people find it easier to forgive others than to release their own guilt and self-condemnation. We often hold ourselves to impossibly high standards and punish ourselves far more harshly than we would punish anyone else for similar mistakes. Eshun's journey reveals several important insights about self-forgiveness. First, Master Kizan's question about how she would treat someone else who made the same mistake highlights the double standard we often apply to ourselves. We can offer compassion to others while denying it to ourselves, as if we deserve treatment we wouldn't inflict on our worst enemy. The insight that excessive guilt is another form of selfishness is particularly profound. When we become consumed with self-blame, we make ourselves the center of the story rather than focusing on how to prevent future harm or serve others better. This suggests that self-forgiveness isn't self-indulgent, but actually a prerequisite for genuine service and care. Eshun's distinction between regret and self-hatred offers a practical pathway forward. We can acknowledge our mistakes, feel appropriate sorrow about any harm caused, and commit to doing better in the future without engaging in the destructive patterns of self-attack that prevent actual learning and growth. This teaching is especially relevant for the self-critical thoughts that often arise at bedtime. Many of us replay the day's mistakes and failings as we try to sleep, creating internal environments that are hostile to rest. We treat ourselves with a harshness that would shock us if we witnessed someone treating another person the same way. The practice of self-compassion that Kazan taught Eshun can be applied to these bedtime struggles. When self-critical thoughts arise, instead of trying to fight them or believe them completely, we can meet them with the same kindness we would offer a dear friend who was suffering. This doesn't mean ignoring areas where we need to improve or avoiding responsibility for our actions. It means approaching self-evaluation from a foundation of basic respect and care rather than judgment and attack. Like Eshun, we might discover that this shift from self-hatred to self-compassion actually makes us more effective at learning from our mistakes and serving others. As you prepare for sleep tonight, notice how you speak to yourself about the day's events. If you detect the voice of harsh self-criticism, you might experiment with Kazan's approach. Ask yourself what you would say to a beloved friend who had made the same mistakes you're criticizing yourself for. The kindness you offer to yourself isn't a luxury, but a necessity for deep rest and genuine growth. Like Eshun, you might find that self-forgiveness doesn't lead to carelessness, but to a more sustainable and effective approach to learning and improvement, one that doesn't require you to be your own enemy in order to become a better person. Master Suzuki's monastery was built on a mountainside with steep paths that required careful attention when walking, especially during winter when ice made the trails treacherous. Students were constantly warned to watch their step, hold handrails, and move slowly to avoid dangerous falls. A young monk named Saido took these warnings very seriously. Having grown up in a flat city, he had little experience with mountain terrain and lived in constant fear of slipping and injuring himself. Every step was calculated, every movement cautious. He would grip handrails with white knuckles and freeze with terror whenever the path seemed particularly steep or icy. This extreme caution extended to all areas of Saido's life. In meditation, he was afraid of letting go of control and allowing his awareness to settle naturally. In daily work, he double and triple-checked everything, paralyzed by the possibility of making mistakes. In conversations with other students, he carefully measured every word to avoid saying anything that might offend or be misunderstood. Master Suzuki observed Saido's fearful approach to life with compassion, but also concern. The young monk's desperate attempts to avoid all risk were preventing him from experiencing the natural flow and spontaneity that characterized genuine Zen practice. One winter morning, after a fresh snowfall had made the paths particularly slippery, Suzuki called Saido to join him for a walk to the village below. Saido approached this invitation with his usual anxiety, bundling himself in extra clothing and moving with painstaking slowness down the mountain path. Halfway down the trail, Suzuki suddenly began walking much faster than seemed safe. Saido called out warnings about the icy conditions, but the master continued to move with what appeared to be reckless abandon. As Saido watched in horror, Suzuki's feet hit a patch of ice, and he went sliding down the steep path, completely out of control. Instead of crying out in fear or trying desperately to stop his slide, Suzuki relaxed his body completely and allowed himself to move with the momentum of the fall. He slid for perhaps 20 feet before coming to a gentle stop against a snowbank, laughing with genuine delight. "Master!" Sado called out, scrambling carefully down to where Suzuki lay in the snow. "Are you injured?" "That was so dangerous." Suzuki stood up, brushing snow from his robes, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Dangerous? That was the most fun I've had all week. But you could have been seriously hurt. You had no control over where you were going or how fast." "Exactly," Suzuki replied with a smile. "And because I wasn't fighting the fall, I didn't get hurt. When you try to control what cannot be controlled, you create the very problems you're trying to avoid." Sado looked confused. "I don't understand, Master. Surely being careful prevents accidents?" "Watch," Suzuki said, and deliberately stepped onto another icy patch. Again he began to slide, and again he relaxed completely into the movement, steering slightly with his body, but not fighting the fundamental momentum. He slid gracefully to another stop, unharmed and grinning. "Being careful and being afraid are two different things," Suzuki explained as he walked back up to where Sado stood frozen with anxiety. "Careful means paying attention and responding appropriately to conditions. Afraid means tensing up and trying to control what cannot be controlled." "But what if you had hit a tree or gone over a cliff?" "Then I would have hit a tree or gone over a cliff," Suzuki said matter-of-factly. "But fighting the fall wouldn't have prevented that. It would only have made the impact more severe." Over the following weeks, Suzuki began teaching Sado what he called the art of falling. Not just physical falling, but the larger spiritual practice of learning to surrender control when circumstances were beyond his influence. "Life is full of unexpected slides," Suzuki explained. "Illness, loss, failure, change. These things happen whether we try to control them or not. The question is whether we fight against them and create additional suffering, or whether we learn to move gracefully with what cannot be avoided." Sado's lessons began with actual physical practice. Suzuki taught him how to fall safely by relaxing rather than tensing, how to roll with momentum rather than fighting it, how to trust his body's natural ability to protect itself when he stopped interfering with panic. But the deeper teaching was about surrendering the illusion of control in all areas of life. In meditation, Sado learned to let go of trying to manage his experience and instead trust the natural intelligence of awareness itself. In daily activities, he practiced responding to unexpected situations with flexibility rather than rigidity. The transformation was gradual but profound. As Sado learned to trust the process of falling, both literally and metaphorically, his anxiety decreased dramatically. He discovered that most of his suffering came not from actual problems, but from his fearful anticipation of problems and his desperate attempts to prevent them. One day, several months later, Sado was walking down the mountain path when he hit an unexpected patch of ice. Instead of the terror and resistance he would have felt before, he found himself relaxing into the slide, adjusting his body naturally and coming to a safe stop with something approaching enjoyment. When he reached the bottom of the path, Master Suzuki was waiting with a knowing smile. "How was your fall?" he asked. "It wasn't a fall," Sado replied with sudden understanding. "It was just another way of walking." Years later, when Sado became a teacher himself, students were struck by his remarkable equanimity in the face of difficulties and setbacks. When they asked him about his secret, he would tell them about learning to fall. Most suffering comes from fighting against what has already happened, he would explain. When you learn to surrender to what cannot be changed, you discover that life carries you much more safely than your attempts to control it ever could. This story beautifully illustrates the difference between prudent caution and fearful control. Sadho's initial approach to the mountain paths was based on the belief that safety comes from controlling every variable and preventing all risks. But this approach actually made him more vulnerable because it prevented him from developing the flexibility and responsiveness that real safety requires. Master Suzuki's demonstration revealed that fighting against uncontrollable circumstances often creates more danger than the circumstances themselves. When he relaxed into his slides rather than tensing up and fighting them, he was able to navigate them safely. This principle applies to many aspects of life beyond physical falling. The teaching about learning to fall extends to all the unexpected slides that life presents: illness, loss of employment, relationship difficulties, financial setbacks, or any of the countless ways that our plans and expectations can be disrupted. We can exhaust ourselves trying to prevent these experiences, or we can learn to move gracefully with them when they occur. This doesn't mean becoming passive or failing to take reasonable precautions. Suzuki wasn't suggesting that students should be reckless or ignore obvious dangers. Rather, he was pointing to the difference between appropriate responsiveness to actual conditions and the paralyzing fear that comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled. For those seeking peaceful sleep, this teaching addresses one of the most common sources of nighttime anxiety: the mind's attempt to solve and control everything before allowing rest. We lie awake trying to manage future scenarios, prevent possible problems, and ensure perfect outcomes for every area of our lives. Sadho's journey suggests a different approach. We can take reasonable care of our responsibilities during the day and then trust that life will carry us through whatever comes next. This trust isn't naive optimism, but recognition that our desperate attempts to control outcomes often create more problems than they solve. As you prepare for sleep tonight, you might experiment with Suzuki's teaching about surrender. Notice areas where you're trying to control outcomes that are beyond your influence. See if you can practice the art of falling, relaxing into uncertainty rather than fighting it, trusting life's natural intelligence rather than relying only on your own planning and worry. The peace that comes from this surrender is different from the brittle security of trying to control everything. It's a deeper confidence that comes from knowing you can respond gracefully to whatever arises, including things you never could have anticipated or prevented. Master Yunmen was known throughout China for his unusual approach to teaching. Unlike masters who offered their students systematic practices and predictable stages of development, Yunmen seemed to delight in uncertainty and unpredictability. His monastery had no fixed schedule, his teaching methods changed constantly, and he refused to give students any guarantees about their spiritual progress. This approach attracted some students and disturbed others. Among those who struggled with Yunmen's methods was a scholar named Wei, who had spent years studying various schools of Buddhism and was accustomed to clear frameworks and measurable advancement. Master Yunmen, Wei said during one of their conversations, "I have studied with many teachers and they all provided clear guidance about what to expect from practice. They explained the stages of meditation, the signs of progress, and the ultimate goals. But you seem to offer nothing but uncertainty. How can I commit to a path when I don't know where it leads?" Yunmen looked at Wei with eyes that seemed to contain both great wisdom and gentle amusement. "Tell me," he said, when you wake up tomorrow morning, do you know for certain that you will still be alive by evening? Well, no, Wei admitted, but that's different. Death is beyond my control. And do you know for certain that your understanding of Buddhism today will be the same next year? No, I hope it will deepen and change. Do you know for certain that the people you love will continue to love you, or that your health will remain good, or that your financial circumstances won't change? Wei began to see where this was leading. No, I don't know any of those things for certain. Yet you wake up each morning and live your life fully, despite having no guarantees about any of the things that matter most to you, Yunmen observed. Why do you demand certainty from spiritual practice when you live without certainty in every other area? Because, Wei said slowly, I suppose I thought spiritual practice might provide the security that ordinary life lacks. Yunmen laughed warmly. Ah, there's your mistake. Spiritual practice doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It teaches you to dance with it. The peace you seek isn't found by getting guarantees, but by discovering that you don't need them. Over the following months, Yunmen gradually introduced Wei to what he called the practice of not knowing. Instead of providing clear answers to Wei's questions, he would offer responses that open new questions. Instead of promising specific outcomes from meditation, he encouraged Wei to approach each sitting with fresh curiosity about what might arise. But how do I know if I'm making progress? Wei asked in frustration. How do you know if a flower is making progress? Yunmen replied, does it worry about whether it's blooming correctly, or does it simply respond to sunlight and rain moment by moment? This analogy helped Wei understand something important about natural development. Flowers don't have goals or timelines for their growth. They simply respond to present conditions with their entire being, and their flowering happens as a natural result of this responsiveness. Yunmen taught Wei to approach his practice the same way. Instead of constantly measuring his progress against predetermined standards, Wei learned to engage fully with whatever arose in each moment of meditation or daily life. Instead of trying to achieve specific states, he practiced being completely present to whatever states were already occurring. The shift was subtle but profound. As Wei stopped demanding guarantees about his spiritual development, he became more willing to explore unfamiliar territories of consciousness. As he released his need for predictable progress, he began to experience spontaneous insights that no systematic approach had ever provided. One day, while sitting in meditation without any agenda or expectation, Wei experienced something extraordinary. For a brief moment, the boundary between self and world completely dissolved. There was no Wei observing an experience. There was simply pure experiencing without a separate experiencer. When this state naturally passed, Wei felt no need to grasp at it or try to recreate it. He understood that it had arisen not because he had followed the right technique, but because he had finally stopped trying to manufacture enlightenment and allowed his natural awareness to reveal itself. Master Yunmen, Wei said after describing this experience, I think I understand now why you don't give guarantees. The most profound experiences can't be produced through effort. They arise when we stop trying to control our spiritual development. Yunmen nodded approvingly. Yes, and now you also understand why demanding certainty about the path actually prevents you from walking it. When you insist on knowing where you're going, you miss the extraordinary journey that's available right here. From that point forward, Wei approached not only his spiritual practice, but his entire life with what he came to call confident uncertainty. He could make practical plans and decisions while remaining open to the countless ways that life might surprise him. He could commit fully to relationships and projects while accepting that all outcomes were ultimately beyond his control. Years later, when Wei became a respected teacher in his own right, students were often puzzled by his refusal to provide the kind of systematic guidance they expected. Like his teacher Yunmen, Wei had learned that the deepest wisdom emerges not from following predetermined paths, but from responding authentically to the unrepeatable circumstances of each moment. "The only guarantee I can offer," Wei would tell his students, "is that if you bring complete presence to this moment, it will teach you everything you need to know for the next one." Tonight, as you finally release into sleep, you can trust that you are returning to your most natural state. Sleep is not an escape from awareness, but awareness freed from the burden of constantly trying to manage experience. In deep rest, the boundaries between self and world naturally soften, revealing the interconnected nature of all existence. You don't need to maintain these teachings through effort or worry about forgetting them. Like seeds planted in fertile ground, they will continue working in their own way and their own time. Your task now is simply to rest, trusting that the wisdom you've touched tonight will continue to unfold through the natural intelligence of your being. Let your breathing slow and deepen completely. Feel your body releasing all tension, returning to its natural state of ease. Allow your mind to release its grip on problems, plans, and concerns, trusting that clarity will return naturally with the dawn. The Zen tradition reminds us that enlightenment is not a distant goal, but our natural condition, temporarily veiled by our busy efforts to find it. In sleep, all seeking ceases, all effort stops, and what remains is the fundamental peace that has been here all along. May your sleep tonight be profound and restorative. May you rest in the confidence that you are exactly where you need to be, experiencing exactly what you need to experience. May you awaken refreshed and renewed, carrying the peace you've discovered into whatever tomorrow may bring.